Chapter 21. The Service of King James. Miss Arabella Bishop was aroused very early on the following morning by the brazen voice of a bugle and the insistent clanging of a bell in the ship's belfry. As she lay awake, idly watching the rippled green water that appeared to be streaming past the heavily glazed porthole, she became gradually aware of the sounds of swift, labored bustle, the clatter of many feet, the shouts of hoarse voices, and the persistent trundlings of heavy bodies in the wardroom immediately below the deck of the cabin. Conceiving these sounds to portend a more than normal activity, she sat up, pervaded by a vague alarm, and roused her still slumbering woman. In his cabin on the starboard side, Lord Julian, disturbed by the same sounds, was already astir and hurriedly dressing. When presently he emerged under the break of the poop, he found himself staring up into a mountain of canvas. Every foot of sail that she could carry had been crowded to the Arabella's yards, to catch the morning breeze. Ahead and on either side stretched the limitless expanse of ocean, sparkling golden in the sun, as yet no more than a half-disk of flame upon the horizon straight ahead. About him in the waist, where all last night had been so peaceful, there was a frenziedly active bustle of some 60 men. By the rail, immediately above and behind Lord Julian, stood Captain Blood in altercation with a one-eyed giant, whose head was swathed in a red cotton kerchief, whose blue shirt hung open at the waist. As his lordship, moving forward, revealed himself, their voices ceased and Blood turned to greet him. "Good morning to you," he said, and added, "I've blundered badly, so I have. I should have known better than to come so close to Jamaica by night. But I was in haste to land you. Come up here. I have something to show you." Wondering, Lord Julian mounted the companion as he was bidden. Standing beside Captain Blood, he looked astern, following the indication of the captain's hand, and cried out in his amazement. There, not more than 3 miles away, was land, an uneven wall of vivid green that filled the western horizon. And a couple of miles this side of it, bearing after them, came speeding 3 great white ships. "They fly no colors, but they're part of the Jamaica fleet." Blood spoke without excitement, almost with a certain listlessness. "When dawn broke we found ourselves running to meet them. We went about and it's been a race ever since. But the Arabella has been at sea these 4 months, and her bottom's too foul for the speed we're needing." Wolverstone hooked his thumbs into his broad leather belt, and from his great height looked down sardonically upon Lord Julian, tall man though his lordship was. "So that you're like to be in yet another sea fight afore you've done why ships, my lord?" "That's a point we were just arguing," said Blood. "For I hold that we're in no case to fight against such odds." "The odds be damned." Wolverstone thrust out his heavy jowl. "We're used to odds. The odds was heavier at Maracaibo, yet we won out and took 3 ships. They was heavier yesterday when we engaged Don Miguel." "Aye, but those were Spaniards." "And what better are these? Are ye afeard of a lubberly Barbados planter?" "Whatever ails you, Peter? I've never known ye scared afore." A gun boomed out behind them. "That'll be the signal to lie to," said Blood in the same listless voice, and he fetched a sigh. Wolverstone squared himself defiantly before his captain. "I'll see Colonel Bishop in hell or ever I lies to for him." And he spat, presumably for purposes of emphasis. His lordship intervened. "Oh, but, by your leave, surely there is nothing to be apprehended from Colonel Bishop, considering the service you have rendered to his niece and to me." Wolverstone's hoarse laugh interrupted him. "Hark to the gentleman," he mocked. "You don't know Colonel Bishop, that's clear. Not for his niece, not for his daughter, not for his own mother, would he forego the blood what he thinks due to him. A drinker of blood he is. A nasty beast. We knows, the captain and me. We been his slaves." "But there is myself," said Lord Julian with great dignity. Wolverstone laughed again, whereat his lordship flushed. He was moved to raise his voice above its usual languid level. "I assure you that my word counts for something in England." "Oh aye, in England. But this ain't England, damn." Came the roar of a second gun, and a round shot splashed the water less than half a cable's length astern. Blood leaned over the rail to speak to the fair young man immediately below him by the helmsman at the whipstaff. "Bid them take in sail, Jeremy," he said quietly. "We lie to." But Wolverstone interposed again. "Hold there a moment, Jeremy," he roared. "Wait." He swung back to face the captain, who had placed a hand on his shoulder and was smiling, a trifle wistfully. "Steady, old wolf. Steady." Captain Blood admonished him. "Steady yourself, Peter. You've gone mad. Will ye doom us all to hell out of tenderness for that cold slip of a girl?" "Stop!" cried Blood in sudden fury. But Wolverstone would not stop. "It's the truth, you fool. It's that cursed petticoat's making a coward of you. It's for her that Uriah feared, and she Colonel Bishop's niece. My God, man, ye'll have a mutiny aboard, and I'll lead it myself sooner than surrender to be hanged in Port Royal." Their glances met, sullen defiance braving dull anger, surprise and pain. "There is no question," said Blood, "of surrender for any man aboard save only myself. If Bishop can report to England that I am taken and hanged, he will magnify himself and at the same time gratify his personal rancor against me. That should satisfy him. I'll send him a message offering to surrender aboard his ship, taking Miss Bishop and Lord Julian with me, but only on condition that the Arabella is allowed to proceed unharmed. It's a bargain that he'll accept if I know him at all." "It's a bargain he'll never be offered," retorted Wolverstone, and his earlier vehemence was as nothing to his vehemence now. "You're surely daft even to think of it, Peter? Not so daft as you when you talk of fighting that." He flung out an arm as he spoke to indicate the pursuing ships, which were slowly but surely creeping nearer. "Before we've run another half-mile we shall be within range." Wolverstone swore elaborately, then suddenly checked. Out of the tail of his single eye he had espied a trim figure in grey silk that was ascending the companion. So engrossed had they been that they had not seen Miss Bishop come from the door of the passage leading to the cabin. And there was something else that those three men on the poop and pit immediately below them had failed to observe. Some moments ago Ogle, followed by the main body of his gun-deck crew, had emerged from the booby hatch, to fall into muttered, angrily vehement talk with those who, abandoning the gun tackles upon which they were laboring, had come to crowd about him. Even now Blood had no eyes for that. He turned to look at Miss Bishop, marveling a little, after the manner in which yesterday she had avoided him, that she should now venture upon the quarter-deck. Her presence at this moment, and considering the nature of his altercation with Wolverstone, was embarrassing. Very sweet and dainty she stood before him in her gown of shimmering grey, a faint excitement tinting her fair cheeks and sparkling in her clear hazel eyes, that looked so frank and honest. She wore no hat, and the ringlets of her gold-brown hair fluttered distractingly in the morning breeze. Captain Blood bared his head and bowed silently in a greeting which she returned composedly and formally. "What is happening, Lord Julian?" she inquired. As if to answer her, a third gun spoke from the ships towards which she was looking intent and wonderingly. A frown rumpled her brow. She looked from one to the other of the men who stood there so glum and obviously ill at ease. "They are ships of the Jamaica fleet," his lordship answered her. It should in any case have been a sufficient explanation. But before more could be added, their attention was drawn at last to Ogle, who came bounding up the broad ladder, and to the men lounging aft in his wake, in all of which, instinctively, they apprehended a vague menace. At the head of the companion, Ogle found his progress barred by Blood, who confronted him, a sudden sternness in his face and in every line of him. "What's this?" the captain demanded sharply. "Your station is on the gun-deck. Why have you left it?" Thus challenged, the obvious truculence faded out of Ogle's bearing, quenched by the old habit of obedience and the natural dominance that was the secret of the captain's rule over his wild followers. But it gave no pause to the gunner's intention. If anything, it increased his excitement. "Captain," he said, and as he spoke he pointed to the pursuing ships, "Colonel Bishop holds us. We're in no case either to run or fight." Blood's height seemed to increase, as did his sternness. "Ogle," said he, in a voice cold and sharp as steel, "your station is on the gun-deck. You'll return to it at once and take your crew with you, or else—" But Ogle, violent of mien and gesture, interrupted him. "Threats will not serve, Captain." "Will they not?" It was the first time in his buccaneering career that an order of his had been disregarded, or that a man had failed in the obedience to which he pledged all those who joined him. That this insubordination should proceed from one of those whom he most trusted, one of his old Barbados associates, was in itself a bitterness, and made him reluctant to that which instinct told him must be done. His hand closed over the butt of one of the pistols slung before him. "Nor will that serve you," Ogle warned him still more fiercely. "The men are of my thinking, and they'll have their way." "And what way may that be?" "The way to make us safe. We'll neither sink nor hang whiles we can help it." From the 3 or 4 score men massed below in the waist came a rumble of approval. Captain Blood's glance raked the ranks of those resolute, fierce-eyed fellows, then it came to rest again on Ogle. There was here quite plainly a vague threat, a mutinous spirit he could not understand. "You come to give advice then, do you?" quoth he, relenting nothing of his sternness. "That's it, Captain, advice. That girl there." He flung out a bare arm to point to her. "Bishop's girl, the governor of Jamaica's niece. We want her as a hostage for our safety." "Aye," roared in chorus the buccaneers below, and one or two of them elaborated that affirmation. In a flash Captain Blood saw what was in their minds. And for all that he lost nothing of his outward stern composure, fear invaded his heart. "And how," he asked, "do you imagine that Miss Bishop will prove such a hostage?" "It's a providence having her aboard, a providence. Heave to, Captain, and signal them to send a boat, and assure themselves that Miss is here. Then let them know that if they attempt to hinder our sailing hence, we'll hang the doxy first and fight for it after. That'll cool Colonel Bishop's heat, maybe? And maybe it won't." Slow and mocking came Wolverstone's voice to answer the other's confident excitement, and as he spoke he advanced to Blood's side, an unexpected ally. "Some of them doghawks may believe that tale." He jerked a contemptuous thumb towards the men in the waist, whose ranks were steadily being increased by the advent of others from the forecastle. "Although even some of they should know better, for there's still a few was on Barbados with us, and are acquainted like me and you with Colonel Bishop. If ye're counting on pulling Bishop's heartstrings, you're a bigger fool, Ogle, than I've always thought you was with anything but guns. There's no heaving to for such a matter as that unless you wants to make quite sure of our being sunk. Though we had a cargo of Bishop's nieces it wouldn't make him hold his hand. Why, as I was just telling his lordship here, who thought like you that having Miss Bishop aboard would make us safe, not for his mother would that filthy slaver forego what's due to him. And if ye weren't a fool, Ogle, you wouldn't need me to tell you this. We've got to fight, my lads." "How can we fight, man?" Ogle stormed at him, furiously battling the conviction which Wolverstone's argument was imposing upon his listeners. "You may be right and you may be wrong. We've got to chance it. It's our only chance." The rest of his words were drowned in the shouts of the hands insisting that the girl be given up to be held as a hostage. And then louder than before roared a gun away to leeward, and away on their starboard beam they saw the spray flung up by the shot, which had gone wide. "They are within range," cried Ogle. And leaning from the rail, "Put down the helm," he commanded. Pitt, at his post beside the helmsman, turned intrepidly to face the excited gunner. "Since when have you commanded on the main deck, Ogle?" "I take my orders from the captain." "You'll take this order from me or by God you'll—" "Wait," Blood bade him, interrupting, and he set a restraining hand upon the gunner's arm. "There is, I think, a better way." He looked over his shoulder aft at the advancing ships, the foremost of which was now a bare quarter of a mile away. His glance swept in passing over Miss Bishop and Lord Julian standing side by side some paces behind him. He observed her pale and tense, with parted lips and startled eyes that were fixed upon him, an anxious witness of this deciding of her fate. He was thinking swiftly, reckoning the chances if by pistoling Ogle he were to provoke a mutiny. That some of the men would rally to him he was sure. But he was no less sure that the main body would oppose him, and prevail in spite of all that he could do, taking the chance that holding Miss Bishop to ransom seemed to afford them. And if they did that, one way or the other, Miss Bishop would be lost. For even if Bishop yielded to their demand, they would retain her as a hostage. Meanwhile Ogle was growing impatient. His arm still gripped by Blood, he thrust his face into the captain's. "What better way?" he demanded. "There is none better. I'll not be bubbled by what Wolverstone has said. He may be right and he may be wrong. We'll test it. It's our only chance, I've said, and we must take it." The better way that was in Captain Blood's mind was the way that already he had proposed to Wolverstone. Whether the men in the panic Ogle had aroused among them would take a different view from Wolverstone's he did not know. But he saw quite clearly now that if they consented, they would not on that account depart from their intention in the matter of Miss Bishop. They would make of Blood's own surrender merely an additional card in this game against the governor of Jamaica. "It's through her that we're in this trap," Ogle stormed on. "Through her and through you. It was to bring her to Jamaica that you risked all our lives, and we're not going to lose our lives as long as there's a chance to make ourselves safe through her." He was turning again to the helmsman below, when Blood's grip tightened on his arm. Ogle wrenched it free with an oath. But Blood's mind was now made up. He had found the only way, and repellent though it might be to him, he must take it. "That is a desperate chance," he cried. "Mine is the safe and easy way." "Wait." He leaned over the rail. "Put the helm down," he bade Pitt. "Heave her to and signal to them to send a boat." A silence of astonishment fell upon the ship, of astonishment and suspicion at this sudden yielding. But Pitt, although he shared it, was prompt to obey. His voice rang out, giving the necessary orders, and after an instant's pause, a score of hands sprang to execute them. Came the creak of blocks and the rattle of slatting sails as they swung aweather, and Captain Blood turned and beckoned Lord Julian forward. His lordship, after a moment's hesitation, advanced in surprise and mistrust, a mistrust shared by Miss Bishop, who, like his lordship and all else aboard, though in a different way, had been taken aback by Blood's sudden submission to the demand to lie to. Standing now at the rail, with Lord Julian beside him, Captain Blood explained himself. Briefly and clearly he announced to all the object of Lord Julian's voyage to the Caribbean, and he informed them of the offer which yesterday Lord Julian had made to him. That offer I rejected, as his lordship will tell you, deeming myself affronted by it. Those of you who have suffered under the rule of King James will understand me. But now in the desperate case in which we find ourselves, outsailed and likely to be outfought as Ogle has said, I am ready to take the way of Morgan, to accept the king's commission and shelter us all behind it. It was a thunderbolt that for a moment left them all dazed. Then Babel was reenacted. The main body of them welcomed the announcement as only men who have been preparing to die can welcome a new lease of life. But many could not resolve one way or the other until they were satisfied upon several questions, and chiefly upon one which was voiced by Ogle. Will Bishop respect the commission when you hold it? It was Lord Julian who answered. It will go very hard with him if he attempts to flout the king's authority. And though he should dare attempt it, be sure that his own officers will not dare to do other than oppose him. Aye, said Ogle, that is true. But there were some who were still in open and frank revolt against the course. Of these was Wolverstone, who at once proclaimed his hostility. I'll rot in hell or ever I serves the king, he bawled in a great rage. But Blood quieted him and those who thought as he did. No man need follow me into the king's service who is reluctant. That is not in the bargain. What is in the bargain is that I accept this service with such of you as may choose to follow me. Don't think I accept it willingly. For myself, I am entirely of Wolverstone's opinion. I accept it as the only way to save us all from the certain destruction into which my own act may have brought us. And even those of you who do not choose to follow me shall share the immunity of all, and shall afterwards be free to depart. Those are the terms upon which I sell myself to the king. Let Lord Julian, the representative of the Secretary of State, say whether he agrees to them. Prompt, eager, and clear came his lordship's agreement. And that was practically the end of the matter. Lord Julian, the but now of good-humoredly ribald jests and half-derisive acclamations, plunged away to his cabin for the commission, secretly rejoicing at a turn of events which enabled him so creditably to discharge the business on which he had been sent. Meanwhile the boatswain signaled to the Jamaica ships to send a boat, and the men in the waist broke their ranks and went noisily flocking to line the bulwarks and view the great stately vessels that were racing down towards them. As Ogle left the quarter-deck, Blood turned and came face to face with Miss Bishop. She had been observing him with shining eyes, but at sight of his dejected countenance, and the deep frown that scarred his brow, her own expression changed. She approached him with a hesitation entirely unusual to her. She set a hand lightly upon his arm. You have chosen wisely, sir, she commended him, however much against your inclinations. He looked with gloomy eyes upon her for whom he had made this sacrifice. I owed it to you or thought I did, he said. She did not understand. Your resolve delivered me from a horrible danger, she admitted, and she shivered at the memory of it. But I do not understand why you should have hesitated when first it was proposed to you. It is an honorable service. King James's? He sneered. England's, she corrected him in reproof. The country is all, sir, the sovereign not. King James will pass, others will come and pass. England remains to be honorably served by her sons, whatever rancor they may hold against the man who rules her in their time. He showed some surprise. Then he smiled a little. Shrewd advocacy, he approved it. You should have spoken to the crew. And then, the note of irony deepening in his voice, do you suppose now that this honorable service might redeem one who was a pirate and a thief? Her glance fell away. Her voice faltered a little in replying. If he needs redeeming, perhaps he has been judged too harshly. The blue eyes flashed and the firm lips relaxed their grim set. Why, if ye think that, he said, considering her, an odd hunger in his glance, life might have its uses after all, and even the service of King James might become tolerable. Looking beyond her, across the water, he observed a boat putting off from one of the great ships, which, hove to now, were rocking gently some 300 yards away. Abruptly his manner changed. He was like one recovering, taking himself in hand again. If you will go below and get your gear and your woman, you shall presently be sent aboard one of the ships of the fleet. He pointed to the boat as he spoke. She left him, and thereafter with Wolverstone, leaning upon the rail, he watched the approach of that boat, manned by a dozen sailors, and commanded by a scarlet figure seated stiffly in the stern sheets. He leveled his telescope upon that figure. "It'll not be Bishop himself," said Wolverstone between question and assertion. "No." Blood closed his telescope. "I don't know who it is." "Ha!" Wolverstone vented an ejaculation of sneering mirth. "For all his eagerness, Bishop be none so willing to come hisself. He's been aboard this hulk afore and we made him swim for it that time. He'll have his memories. So he sends a deputy. This deputy proved to be an officer named Calverley, a vigorous, self-sufficient fellow, comparatively fresh from England, whose manner made it clear that he came fully instructed by Colonel Bishop upon the matter of how to handle the pirates. His air as he stepped into the waist of the Arabella was haughty, truculent, and disdainful. Blood, the king's commission now in his pocket, and Lord Julian standing beside him, waited to receive him, and Captain Calverley was a little taken aback at finding himself confronted by two men so very different outwardly from anything that he had expected. But he lost none of his haughty poise, and scarcely deigned a glance at the swarm of fierce, half-naked fellows lounging in a semicircle to form a background. "Good day to you, sir," Blood hailed him pleasantly. "I have the honor to give you welcome aboard the Arabella. My name is Blood, Captain Blood at your service. You may have heard of me." Captain Calverley stared hard. The airy manner of this redoubtable buccaneer was hardly what he had looked for in a desperate fellow, compelled to ignominious surrender. A thin, sour smile broke on the officer's haughty lips. "You'll ruffle it to the gallows, no doubt," he said contemptuously. "I suppose that is after the fashion of your kind. Meanwhile it's your surrender I require, my man, not your impudence." Captain Blood appeared surprised, pained. He turned in appeal to Lord Julian. "D'ye hear that now? And did ye ever hear the like? But what did I tell ye? Ye see, the young gentleman's under a misapprehension entirely. Perhaps it'll save broken bones if your lordship explains just who and what I am." Lord Julian advanced a step and bowed perfunctorily and rather disdainfully to that very disdainful but now dumbfounded officer. Pitt, who watched the scene from the quarterdeck rail, tells us that his lordship was as grave as a parson at a hanging. But I suspect this gravity for a mask under which Lord Julian was secretly amused. "I have the honor to inform you, sir," he said stiffly, "that Captain Blood holds a commission in the King's service under the seal of my Lord Sunderland, His Majesty's Secretary of State." Captain Calverley's face empurpled, his eyes bulged. The buccaneers in the background chuckled and crowed and swore among themselves in their relish of this comedy. For a long moment Calverley stared in silence at his lordship, observing the costly elegance of his dress, his air of calm assurance, and his cold, fastidious speech, all of which savored distinctly of the great world to which he belonged. "And who the devil may you be?" he exploded at last. Colder still and more distant than ever grew his lordship's voice. "You're not very civil, sir, as I have already noticed. My name is Wade, Lord Julian Wade. I am His Majesty's envoy to these barbarous parts, and my Lord Sunderland's near kinsman. Colonel Bishop has been notified of my coming." The sudden change in Calverley's manner at Lord Julian's mention of his name showed that the notification had been received, and that he had knowledge of it. I believe that he has," said Calverley between doubt and suspicion. "That is, that he has been notified of the coming of Lord Julian Wade. But, aboard this ship?" The officer made a gesture of helplessness, and, surrendering to his bewilderment, fell abruptly silent. "I was coming out on the Royal Mary. That is what we were advised. But the Royal Mary fell a victim to a Spanish privateer, and I might never have arrived at all but for the gallantry of Captain Blood, who rescued me." Light broke upon the darkness of Calverley's mind. "I see. I understand. I will take leave to doubt it." His lordship's tone abetted nothing of its asperity. "But that can wait. If Captain Blood will show you his commission, perhaps that will set all doubts at rest and we may proceed. I shall be glad to reach Port Royal." Captain Blood thrust a parchment under Calverley's bulging eyes. The officer scanned it, particularly the seals and signature. He stepped back, a baffled, impotent man. He bowed helplessly. "I must return to Colonel Bishop for my orders," he informed them. At that moment a lane was opened in the ranks of the men, and through this came Miss Bishop followed by her octoroon woman. Over his shoulder Captain Blood observed her approach. "Perhaps, since Colonel Bishop is with you, you will convey his niece to him. Miss Bishop was aboard the Royal Mary also, and I rescued her together with his lordship. She will be able to acquaint her uncle with the details of that and of the present state of affairs." Swept thus from surprise to surprise, Captain Calverley could do no more than bow again. "As for me," said Lord Julian, with intent to make Miss Bishop's departure free from all interference on the part of the buccaneers, I shall remain aboard the Arabella until we reach Port Royal. My compliments to Colonel Bishop. Say that I look forward to making his acquaintance there. Chapter 22. Hostilities. In the great harbor of Port Royal, spacious enough to have given moorings to all the ships of all the navies of the world, the Arabella rode at anchor. Almost she had the air of a prisoner, for a quarter of a mile ahead, to starboard, rose the lofty, massive single round tower of the fort, whilst a couple of cables length astern, and to larboard, rode the 6 men of war that composed the Jamaica squadron. Abeam with the Arabella, across the harbor, were the flat-fronted white buildings of that imposing city that came down to the very water's edge. Behind these the red roofs rose like terraces, marking the gentle slope upon which the city was built, dominated here by a turret, there by a spire, and behind these again a range of green hills with for ultimate background a sky that was like a dome of polished steel. On a cane daybed that had been set for him on the quarterdeck, sheltered from the dazzling, blistering sunshine by an improvised awning of brown sailcloth, lounged Peter Blood, a calf-bound, well-thumbed copy of Horace's Odes neglected in his hands. From immediately below him came the swish of mops and the gurgle of water in the scuppers, for it was still early morning, and under the directions of Hayton, the boatswain, the swabbers were at work in the waist and forecastle. Despite the heat and the stagnant air, one of the toilers found breath to croak a ribald buccaneering ditty. For we laid her board and board, and we put her to the sword, and we sank her in the deep blue sea. So it's hi-ho and heave-a-ho. Who'll sail for the main with me? Blood fetched a sigh, and the ghost of a smile played over his lean, sun-tanned face. Then the black brows came together above the vivid blue eyes, and thought swiftly closed the door upon his immediate surroundings. Things had not sped at all well with him in the past fortnight since his acceptance of the King's commission. There had been trouble with Bishop from the moment of landing. As Blood and Lord Julian had stepped ashore together, they had been met by a man who took no pains to dissemble his chagrin at the turn of events and his determination to change it. He awaited them on the mole, supported by a group of officers. "You are Lord Julian Wade, I understand," was his truculent greeting. For Blood at the moment he had nothing beyond a malignant glance. Lord Julian bowed. "I take it I have the honor to address Colonel Bishop, Deputy Governor of Jamaica." It was almost as if his lordship were giving the colonel a lesson in deportment. The colonel accepted it and belatedly bowed, removing his broad hat. Then he plunged on. "You have granted, I am told, the King's commission to this man." His very tone betrayed the bitterness of his rancor. "Your motives were no doubt worthy, your gratitude to him for delivering you from the Spaniards. But the thing itself is unthinkable, my lord. The commission must be cancelled." "I don't think I understand," said Lord Julian distantly. "To be sure you don't, or you'd never ha' done it. The fellow's bubbled you. Why, he's first a rebel, then an escaped slave, and lastly a bloody pirate. I've been hunting him this year past. I assure you, sir, that I was fully informed of all. I do not grant the King's commission lightly. Don't you, by God? And what else do you call this? But as His Majesty's Deputy Governor of Jamaica, I'll take leave to correct your mistake in my own way." "Ah, and what way may that be?" "There's a gallows waiting for this rascal in Port Royal." Blood would have intervened at that, but Lord Julian forestalled him. "I see, sir, that you do not yet quite apprehend the circumstances. If it is a mistake to grant Captain Blood a commission, the mistake is not mine. I am acting upon the instructions of my Lord Sunderland, and with a full knowledge of all the facts, his lordship expressly designated Captain Blood for this commission if Captain Blood could be persuaded to accept it." Colonel Bishop's mouth fell open in surprise and dismay. "Lord Sunderland designated him?" he asked, amazed. "Expressly." His lordship waited a moment for a reply. None coming from the speechless deputy governor, he asked a question. "Would you still venture to describe the matter as a mistake, sir? And dare you take the risk of correcting it?" I had not dreamed." "I understand, sir. Let me present Captain Blood." Perforce Bishop must put on the best face he could command. But that it was no more than a mask for his fury and his venom was plain to all. From that unpromising beginning matters had not improved, rather had they grown worse. Blood's thoughts were upon this and other things as he lounged there on the daybed. He had been a fortnight in Port Royal, his ship virtually a unit now in the Jamaica squadron. And when the news of it reached Tortuga and the buccaneers who awaited his return, the name of Captain Blood, which had stood so high among the brethren of the coast, would become a byword, a thing of execration, and before all was done his life might pay forfeit for what would be accounted a treacherous defection. And for what had he placed himself in this position? for the sake of a girl who avoided him so persistently and intentionally that he must assume that she still regarded him with aversion. He had scarcely been vouchsafed a glimpse of her in all this fortnight, although with that in view for his main object he had daily haunted her uncle's residence, and daily braved the unmasked hostility and baffled rancor in which Colonel Bishop held him. Nor was that the worst of it. He was allowed plainly to perceive that it was the graceful, elegant young trifler from St. James's, Lord Julian Wade, to whom her every moment was devoted. And what chance had he, a desperate adventurer with a record of outlawry, against such a rival as that, a man of parts, moreover, as he was bound to admit? You conceive the bitterness of his soul. He beheld himself to be as the dog in the fable that had dropped the substance to snatch at a delusive shadow. He sought comfort in a line on the open page before him. Levius fit patientia quicquid corrigere est nefas. Sought it but hardly found it. A boat that had approached unnoticed from the shore came scraping and bumping against the great red hull of the Arabella, and a raucous voice sent up a hailing shout. From the ship's belfry 2 silvery notes rang clear and sharp, and a moment or two later the boatswain's whistle shrilled a long wail. The sounds disturbed Captain Blood from his disgruntled musings. He rose, tall, active, and arrestingly elegant in a scarlet, gold-laced coat that advertised his new position, and slipping the slender volume into his pocket, advanced to the carved rail of the quarter-deck, just as Jeremy Pitt was setting foot upon the companion. "A note for you from the Deputy Governor," said the master shortly, as he proffered a folded sheet. Blood broke the seal and read. Pitt, loosely clad in shirt and breeches, leaned against the rail the while and watched him, unmistakable concern imprinted on his fair, frank countenance. Blood uttered a short laugh and curled his lip. "It is a very peremptory summons," he said, and passed the note to his friend. The young master's gray eyes skimmed it. Thoughtfully he stroked his golden beard. "You'll not go?" he said between question and assertion. "Why not? Haven't I been a daily visitor at the fort? But it'll be about the old wolf that he wants to see you. It gives him a grievance at last. You know, Peter, that it is Lord Julian alone has stood between Bishop and his hate of you. If now he can show that—" "What if he can?" Blood interrupted carelessly. "Shall I be in greater danger ashore than aboard, now that we've but 50 men left, and they lukewarm rogues who would as soon serve the king as me? Jeremy, dear lad, the Arabella's a prisoner here, bedad, twixt the fort there and the fleet yonder. Don't be forgetting that." Jeremy clenched his hands. "Why did ye let Wolverstone and the others go?" he cried with a touch of bitterness. "You should have seen the danger. How could I in honesty have detained them? Was in the bargain. Besides, how could their staying have helped me?" And as Pitt did not answer him, "Ye see," he said and shrugged. "I'll be getting my hat and cane and sword and go ashore in the cockboat. See it manned for me." "You're going to deliver yourself into Bishop's hands?" Pitt warned him. Well, maybe he'll not find me quite so easy to grasp as he imagines. There's a thorn or two left on me." And with a laugh Blood departed to his cabin. Jeremy Pitt answered the laugh with an oath. A moment he stood irresolute where Blood had left him. Then slowly, reluctance dragging at his feet, he went down the companion to give the order for the cockboat. "If anything should happen to you, Peter," he said as Blood was going over the side, "Colonel Bishop had better look to himself. These 50 lads may be lukewarm at present as you say, but, sink me, they'll be anything but lukewarm if there's a breach of faith. And what should be happening to me, Jeremy? Sure now I'll be back for dinner, so I will." Blood climbed down into the waiting boat. But laugh though he might, he knew as well as Pitt that in going ashore that morning he carried his life in his hands. Because of this, it may have been that when he stepped on to the narrow mole, in the shadow of the shallow outer wall of the fort through whose crenels were thrust the black noses of its heavy guns, he gave order that the boat should stay for him at that spot. He realized that he might have to retreat in a hurry. Walking leisurely, he skirted the embattled wall, and passed through the great gates into the courtyard. Half a dozen soldiers lounged there, and in the shadow cast by the wall Major Mallard, the commandant, was slowly pacing. He stopped short at sight of Captain Blood and saluted him as was his due, but the smile that lifted the officer's stiff mustachios was grimly sardonic. Peter Blood's attention, however, was elsewhere. On his right stretched a spacious garden, beyond which rose the white house that was the residence of the Deputy Governor. In that garden's main avenue, that was fringed with palm and sandalwood, he had caught sight of Miss Bishop alone. He crossed the courtyard with suddenly lengthened stride. "Good morning to ye, ma'am," was his greeting as he overtook her, and hat in hand now, he added on a note of protest, "Sure, it's nothing less than uncharitable to make me run in this heat." "Why do you run then?" she asked him coolly, standing slim and straight before him, all in white and very maidenly save in her unnatural composure. "I am pressed," she informed him. "So you will forgive me if I do not stay." "You were none so pressed until I came," he protested, and if his thin lips smiled, his blue eyes were oddly hard. "Since you perceive it, sir, I wonder that you trouble to be so insistent." That crossed the swords between them, and it was against Blood's instincts to avoid an engagement. "Faith, you explain yourself after a fashion," said he. "But since it was more or less in your service that I donned the king's coat, you should suffer it to cover the thief and pirate." She shrugged and turned aside in some resentment and some regret. Fearing to betray the latter, she took refuge in the former. "I do my best," said she, "so that ye can be charitable in some ways." He laughed softly. "Glory be, now I should be thankful for so much. Maybe I'm presumptuous. But I can't forget that when I was no better than a slave in your uncle's household in Barbados, ye used me with a certain kindness." "Why not? In those days you had some claim upon my kindness. You were just an unfortunate gentleman then. And what else would you be calling me now?" "Hardly unfortunate. We have heard of your good fortune on the seas, how your luck has passed into a byword. And we have heard other things, of your good fortune in other directions." She spoke hastily, the thought of Mademoiselle d'Ogeron in her mind, and instantly would have recalled the words had she been able. But Peter Blood swept them lightly aside, reading into them none of her meaning as she feared he would. "Aye, a deal of lies, devil a doubt, as I could prove to you. I cannot think why you should trouble to put yourself on your defense," she discouraged him, "so that ye may think less badly of me than you do. What I think of you can be a very little matter to you, sir." This was a disarming stroke. He abandoned combat for expostulation. "Can ye say that now? Can ye say that, beholding me in this livery of a service I despise? Didn't ye tell me that I might redeem the past? It's little enough I am concerned to redeem the past save only in your eyes. In my own I've done nothing at all that I am ashamed of, considering the provocation I received." Her glance faltered and fell away before his own that was so intent. I can't think why you should speak to me like this," she said with less than her earlier assurance. "Ah, now can't ye indeed?" he cried. "Sure then I'll be telling ye." "Oh, please." There was real alarm in her voice. "I realize fully what you did, and I realize that partly, at least, you may have been urged by consideration for myself. Believe me, I am very grateful. I shall always be grateful. But if it's also your intention always to think of me as a thief and a pirate, faith, ye may keep your gratitude for all the good it's like to do me." A livelier color crept into her cheeks. There was a perceptible heave of the slight breast that faintly swelled the flimsy bodice of white silk. But if she resented his tone and his words, she stifled her resentment. She realized that perhaps she had, herself, provoked his anger. She honestly desired to make amends. "You are mistaken," she began. "It isn't that." But they were fated to misunderstand each other. Jealousy, that troubler of reason, had been overbusy with his wits as it had with hers. "What is it, then?" quoth he, and added the question, "Lord Julian?" She started and stared at him blankly indignant now. "Och, be frank with me," he urged her, unpardonably. "'Twill be a kindness, so it will." For a moment she stood before him with quickened breathing, the color ebbing and flowing in her cheeks. Then she looked past him and tilted her chin forward. You are quite insufferable," she said. "I beg that you will let me pass." He stepped aside, and with the broad feathered hat which he still held in his hand, he waved her on towards the house. "I'll not be detaining you any longer, ma'am. After all, the cursed thing I did for nothing can be undone. Ye'll remember afterwards that it was your hardness drove me." She moved to depart, then checked and faced him again. It was she now who was on her defense, her voice quivering with indignation. "You take that tone? You dare to take that tone?" she cried, astounding him by her sudden vehemence. "You have the effrontery to upbraid me because I will not take your hands when I know how they are stained, when I know you for a murderer and worse?" He stared at her open-mouthed. "A murderer, I?" he said at last. "Must I name your victims? Did you not murder Levasseur?" "Levasseur?" He smiled a little. "So they've told you about that. Do you deny it?" "I killed him, it is true. I can remember killing another man in circumstances that were very similar. That was in Bridgetown on the night of the Spanish raid. Mary Trail would tell you of it. She was present." He clapped his hat on his head with a certain abrupt fierceness, and strode angrily away, before she could answer or even grasp the full significance of what he had said. Chapter 23. Hostages. Peter Blood stood in the pillared portico of Government House, and with unseeing eyes that were laden with pain and anger, stared out across the great harbor of Port Royal to the green hills rising from the farther shore and the ridge of the blue mountains beyond, showing hazily through the quivering heat. He was aroused by the return of the Negro who had gone to announce him, and following now this slave, he made his way through the house to the wide piazza behind it, in whose shade Colonel Bishop and my Lord Julian Wade took what little air there was. "So ye've come," the deputy governor hailed him, and followed the greeting by a series of grunts of vague but apparently ill-humored import. He did not trouble to rise, not even when Lord Julian, obeying the instincts of finer breeding, set him the example. From under scowling brows the wealthy Barbados planter considered his sometime slave, who, hat in hand, leaning lightly upon his long beribboned cane, revealed nothing in his countenance of the anger which was being steadily nourished by this cavalier reception. At last, with scowling brow and in self-sufficient tones, Colonel Bishop delivered himself. "I have sent for you, Captain Blood, because of certain news that has just reached me. I am informed that yesterday evening a frigate left the harbor having on board your associate Wolverstone and 100 men of the 150 that were serving under you. His lordship and I shall be glad to have your explanation of how you came to permit that departure." "Permit?" quoth Blood. "I ordered it." The answer left Bishop speechless for a moment. "Then, you ordered it?" he said in accents of unbelief, whilst Lord Julian raised his eyebrows. "Swans, perhaps you'll explain yourself? Whither has Wolverstone gone?" "To Tortuga. He's gone with a message to the officers commanding the other 4 ships of the fleet that is awaiting me there, telling them what's happened and why they are no longer to expect me." Bishop's great face seemed to swell and its high color to deepen. He swung to Lord Julian. "You hear that, my lord? Deliberately he has let Wolverstone loose upon the seas again. Wolverstone, the worst of all that gang of pirates after himself. I hope your lordship begins at last to perceive the folly of granting the king's commission to such a man as this against all my counsels. Why this thing it's just mutiny, treason. By God, it's matter for a court-martial. Will you cease your blather of mutiny and treason and courts-martial?" Blood put on his hat and sat down unbidden. "I have sent Wolverstone to inform Hagthorpe and Christian and Iberville and the rest of my lads that they've 1 clear month in which to follow my example, quit piracy, and get back to their boucans or their logwood, or else sail out of the Caribbean Sea. That's what I've done." "But the men," his lordship interposed in his level, cultured voice. "This 100 men that Wolverstone has taken with him? They are those of my crew who have no taste for King James's service, and have preferred to seek work of other kinds. It was in our compact, my lord, that there should be no constraining of my men." "I don't remember it," said his lordship with sincerity. Blood looked at him in surprise. Then he shrugged. "Faith, I'm not to blame for your lordship's poor memory. I say that it was so, and I don't lie. I've never found it necessary. In any case he couldn't have supposed that I should consent to anything different." And then the deputy governor exploded. "You have given those damned rascals in Tortuga this warning so that they may escape. That is what you have done. That is how you abuse the commission that has saved your own neck." Peter Blood considered him steadily, his face impassive. "I will remind you," he said at last very quietly, "that the object in view was, leaving out of account your own appetites which, as everyone knows, are just those of a hangman, to rid the Caribbean of buccaneers. Now, I've taken the most effective way of accomplishing that object. The knowledge that I've entered the king's service should in itself go far towards disbanding the fleet of which I was until lately the admiral." "I see," sneered the deputy governor malevolently. "And if it does not? It will be time enough then to consider what else is to be done." Lord Julian forestalled a fresh outburst on the part of Bishop. "It is possible," he said, "that my Lord Sunderland will be satisfied, provided that the solution is such as you promise." It was a courteous, conciliatory speech. Urged by friendliness towards Blood and understanding of the difficult position in which the buccaneer found himself, his lordship was disposed to take his stand upon the letter of his instructions. Therefore he now held out a friendly hand to help him over the latest and most difficult obstacle which Blood himself had enabled Bishop to place in the way of his redemption. Unfortunately the last person from whom Peter Blood desired assistance at that moment was this young nobleman, whom he regarded with the jaundiced eyes of jealousy. "Anyway," he answered with a suggestion of defiance and more than a suggestion of a sneer, "it's the most ye should expect from me, and certainly it's the most ye'll get." His lordship frowned and dabbed his lips with a handkerchief. "I don't think that I quite like the way you put it. Indeed, upon reflection, Captain Blood, I am sure that I do not." "I am sorry for that, so I am," said Blood impudently. "But there it is. I'm not on that account concerned to modify it." His lordship's pale eyes opened a little wider. Languidly he raised his eyebrows. "Ah," he said, "you're a prodigiously uncivil fellow. You disappoint me, sir. I had formed the notion that you might be a gentleman." "And that's not your lordship's only mistake," Bishop cut in. "You made a worse when you gave him the king's commission, and so sheltered the rascal from the gallows I had prepared for him in Port Royal." "Aye, but the worst mistake of all in this matter of commissions," said Blood to his lordship, "was the one that trade this greasy slaver deputy governor of Jamaica instead of its hangman, which is the office for which he's by nature fitted." "Captain Blood," said his lordship sharply in reproof, "upon my soul and honor, sir, you go much too far. You are—" But here Bishop interrupted him. He had heaved himself to his feet at last, and was venting his fury in unprintable abuse. Captain Blood, who had also risen, stood apparently impassive for the storm to spend itself. When at last this happened, he addressed himself quietly to Lord Julian, as if Colonel Bishop had not spoken. "Your lordship was about to say?" he asked with challenging smoothness. But his lordship had by now recovered his habitual composure, and was again disposed to be conciliatory. He laughed and shrugged. "Faith, here's a deal of unnecessary heat," said he. "And God knows this plaguey climate provides enough of that. Perhaps, Colonel Bishop, you are a little uncompromising, and you, sir, are certainly a deal too peppery. I have said, speaking on behalf of my Lord Sunderland, that I am content to await the result of your experiment." But Bishop's fury had by now reached a stage in which it was not to be restrained. "Are you indeed?" he roared. "Well then I am not. This is a matter in which your lordship must allow me to be the better judge. And anyhow I'll take the risk of acting on my own responsibility." Lord Julian abandoned the struggle. He smiled wearily, shrugged, and waved a hand in implied resignation. The deputy governor stormed on. "Since my lord here has given you a commission, I can't regularly deal with you out of hand for piracy as you deserve. But you shall answer before a court-martial for your action in the matter of Wolverstone, and take the consequences." "I see," said Blood. "Now we come to it. And it's yourself as deputy governor will preside over that same court-martial. So that ye can wipe off old scores by hanging me, it's little ye care how ye do it." He laughed and added, "Praemunitus, praemunitus." "What shall that mean?" quoth Lord Julian sharply. "I had imagined that your lordship would have had some education." He was at pains, you see, to be provocative. "It's not the literal meaning I am asking, sir," said Lord Julian with frosty dignity. "I want to know what you desire me to understand." "I'll leave your lordship guessing," said Blood, "and I'll be wishing ye both a very good day." He swept off his feathered hat, and made them a leg very elegantly. "Before you go," said Bishop, "and to save you from any idle rashness, I'll tell you that the harbor master and the commandant have their orders. You don't leave Port Royal, my fine gallows bird. Damn, I mean to provide you with permanent moorings here in Execution Dock." Peter Blood stiffened, and his vivid blue eyes stabbed the bloated face of his enemy. He passed his long cane into his left hand, and with his right thrust negligently into the breast of his doublet, he swung to Lord Julian, who was thoughtfully frowning. "Your lordship, I think, promised me immunity from this." "What I may have promised," said his lordship, "your own conduct makes it difficult to perform." He rose. "You did me a service, Captain Blood, and I had hoped that we might be friends. But since you prefer to have it otherwise—" He shrugged and waved a hand towards the deputy governor. Blood completed the sentence in his own way. "Ye mean that ye haven't the strength of character to resist the urgings of a bully." He was apparently at his ease and actually smiling. "Well, well, as I said before, praemunitus, praemunitus. I'm afraid that you're no scholar, Bishop, or ye'd know that I means forewarned, forearmed." "Forewarned? Ha!" Bishop almost snarled. "The warning comes a little late. You do not leave this house." He took a step in the direction of the doorway and raised his voice. "Ho there!" he was beginning to call. Then with a sudden audible catch in his breath, he stopped short. Captain Blood's right hand had re-emerged from the breast of his doublet, bringing with it a long pistol with silver mountings richly chased, which he leveled within a foot of the deputy governor's head. "And forearmed?" said he. "Don't stir from where you are, my lord, or there may be an accident." And my lord, who had been moving to Bishop's assistance, stood instantly arrested. Chapfallen, with much of his high color suddenly departed, the deputy governor was swaying on unsteady legs. Peter Blood considered him with a grimness that increased his panic. I marvel that I don't pistol you without more ado, ye fat blackguard. If I don't, it's for the same reason that once before I gave ye your life when it was forfeit. You're not aware of the reason, to be sure, but it may comfort ye to know that it exists. At the same time I'll warn ye not to put too heavy a strain on my generosity, which resides at the moment in my trigger finger. Ye mean to hang me, and since that's the worst that can happen to me anyway, you'll realize that I'll not boggle at increasing the account by spilling your nasty blood. He cast his cane from him, thus disengaging his left hand. Be good enough to give me your arm, Colonel Bishop. Come, man, your arm. Under the compulsion of that sharp tone, those resolute eyes, and that gleaming pistol, Bishop obeyed without demur. His recent foul volubility was stemmed. He could not trust himself to speak. Captain Blood tucked his left arm through the deputy governor's proffered right. Then he thrust his own right hand with its pistol back into the breast of his doublet. Though invisible, it's aiming at ye none the less, and I give you my word of honor that I'll shoot ye dead upon the very least provocation, whether that provocation is yours or another's. Ye'll bear that in mind, Lord Julian. And now, ye greasy hangman, step out as brisk and lively as ye can, and behave as naturally as ye may, or it's the black stream of Cocytus ye'll be contemplating. Arm in arm they passed through the house and down the garden, where Arabella lingered, awaiting Peter Blood's return. Consideration of his parting words had brought her first turmoil of mind, then a clear perception of what might be indeed the truth of the death of Levasseur. She perceived that the particular inference drawn from it might similarly have been drawn from Blood's deliverance of Mary Traill. When a man so risks his life for a woman, the rest is easily assumed. For the men who will take such risks without hope of personal gain are few. Blood was of those few, as he had proved in the case of Mary Traill. It needed no further assurances of his to convince her that she had done him a monstrous injustice. She remembered words he had used, words overheard aboard his ship, which he had named the Arabella, on the night of her deliverance from the Spanish admiral, words he had uttered when she had approved his acceptance of the king's commission, the words he had spoken to her that very morning, which had but served to move her indignation. All these assumed a fresh meaning in her mind, delivered now from its unwarranted preconceptions. Therefore she lingered there in the garden, awaiting his return that she might make amends, that she might set a term to all misunderstanding. In impatience she awaited him. Yet her patience, it seemed, was to be tested further. For when at last he came, it was in company, unusually close and intimate company, with her uncle. In vexation she realized that explanations must be postponed. Could she have guessed the extent of that postponement, vexation would have been changed into despair. He passed, with his companion, from that fragrant garden into the courtyard of the fort. Here the commandant, who had been instructed to hold himself in readiness with the necessary men against the need to effect the arrest of Captain Blood, was amazed by the curious spectacle of the deputy governor of Jamaica strolling forth arm in arm and apparently on the friendliest terms with the intended prisoner. For as they went, Blood was chatting and laughing briskly. They passed out of the gates unchallenged, and so came to the mole where the cockboat from the Arabella was waiting. They took their places side by side in the stern sheets, and were pulled away together, always very close and friendly, to the great red ship where Jeremy Pitt so anxiously awaited news. You conceive the master's amazement to see the deputy governor come toiling up the entrance ladder, with Blood following very close behind him. "Sure, I walked into a trap as ye feared, Jeremy," Blood hailed him. "But I walked out again and fetched the trapper with me. He loves his life, does this fat rascal." Colonel Bishop stood in the waist, his great face blenched to the color of clay, his mouth loose, almost afraid to look at the sturdy ruffians who lounged about the shot-rack on the main hatch. Blood shouted an order to the boatswain, who was leaning against the forecastle bulkhead. "Throw me a rope with a running noose over the yardarm there, against the need of it. Now, don't be alarming yourself, Colonel, darling. It's no more than a provision against your being unreasonable, which I am sure ye'll not be. We'll talk the matter over whiles we are dining, for I trust ye'll not refuse to honor my table by your company." He led away the will-less, cowed bully to the great cabin. Benjamin, the negro steward in white drawers and cotton shirt, made haste by his command to serve dinner. Colonel Bishop collapsed on the locker under the stern ports, and spoke now for the first time. "May I ask what are your intentions?" he quavered. "Why, nothing sinister, Colonel. Although ye deserve nothing less than that same rope and yardarm, I assure you that it's to be employed only as a last resource. Evie said his lordship made a mistake when he handed me the commission which the Secretary of State did me the honor to design for me. I'm disposed to agree with you, so I'll take to the sea again. Cras ingens iterabimus equor. It's the fine Latin scholar ye'll be when I've done with ye. I'll be getting back to Tortuga and my buccaneers, who at least are honest, decent fellows. So I've fetched ye aboard as a hostage." "My God," groaned the deputy governor. Ye never mean that ye'll carry me to Tortuga?" Blood laughed outright. "Oh, I'd never serve ye such a bad turn as that. No. All I want is that ye ensure my safe departure from Port Royal. And if ye're reasonable, I'll not even trouble you to swim for it this time. Ye've given certain orders to your harbor master, and others to the commandant of your plaguey fort. Ye'll be so good as to send for them both aboard here, and inform them in my presence that the Arabella is leaving this afternoon on the king's service and is to pass out unmolested. And so as to make quite sure of their obedience, they shall go a little voyage with us themselves. Here's what you require. Now write, unless you prefer the yardarm." Colonel Bishop heaved himself up in a pet. "You constrain me with violence," he was beginning. Blood smoothly interrupted him. "Sure, now I'm not constraining you at all. I'm giving you a perfectly free choice between the pen and the rope. It's a matter for yourself entirely." Bishop glared at him. Then shrugging heavily, he took up the pen and sat down at the table. In an unsteady hand he wrote that summons to his officers. Blood dispatched it ashore, and then bade his unwilling guest to table. "I trust, Colonel, your appetite is as stout as usual." The wretched bishop took the seat to which he was commanded. As for eating, however, that was not easy to a man in his position, nor did Blood press him. The captain himself fell to with a good appetite. But before he was midway through the meal came Hayton to inform him that Lord Julian Wade had just come aboard, and was asking to see him instantly. "I was expecting him," said Blood. "Fetch him in." Lord Julian came. He was very stern and dignified. His eyes took in the situation at a glance as Captain Blood rose to greet him. "It's mighty friendly of you to have joined us, my lord." "Captain Blood," said his lordship with asperity, "I find your humor a little forced. I don't know what may be your intentions, but I wonder, do you realize the risks you are running? And I wonder, does your lordship realize the risk to yourself in following us aboard as I had counted that you would? What shall that mean, sir?" Blood signaled to Benjamin, who was standing behind Bishop. "Set a chair for his lordship. Hayton, send his lordship's boat ashore. Tell them he'll not be returning yet a while." "What's that?" cried his lordship. "Blister me? D'ye mean to detain me? Are ye mad?" "Better wait, Hayton, in case his lordship should turn violent," said Blood. "You, Benjamin, you heard the message. Deliver it." "Will you tell me what you intend, sir?" demanded his lordship, quivering with anger. "Just to make myself and my lads here safe from Colonel Bishop's gallows. I've said that I trusted to your gallantry not to leave him in the lurch, but to follow him hither, and there's a note from his hand gone ashore to summon the harbor master and the commandant of the fort. Once they are aboard, I shall have all the hostages I need for our safety." "You scoundrel," said his lordship through his teeth. "Sure, now that's entirely a matter of the point of view," said Blood. "Ordinarily it isn't the kind of name I could suffer any man to apply to me. Still, considering that ye willingly did me a service once, and that ye're likely unwillingly to do me another now, I'll overlook your discourtesy, so I will." His lordship laughed. "You fool," he said. "Do you dream that I came aboard your pirate ship without taking my measures? I informed the commandant of exactly how you had compelled Colonel Bishop to accompany you. Judge now whether he or the harbor master will obey the summons, or whether you will be allowed to depart as you imagine." Blood's face became grave. "I'm sorry for that," said he. "I thought you would be," answered his lordship. "Oh, but not on my own account. It's the deputy governor there I'm sorry for. D'ye know what ye've done? Sure, now ye've very likely hanged him." "My God!" cried Bishop in a sudden increase of panic. "If they so much as put a shot across my bows, up goes their deputy governor to the yardarm. Your only hope, Colonel, lies in the fact that I shall send them word of that intention. And so that you may mend as far as you can the harm you have done, it's yourself shall bear them the message, my lord." "I'll see you damned before I do," fumed his lordship. "Why, that's unreasonable and unreasoning. But if ye insist, why, another messenger will do as well, and another hostage aboard, as I had originally intended, will make my hand the stronger." Lord Julian stared at him, realizing exactly what he had refused. "You'll think better of it now that ye understand?" quoth Blood. "Aye, in God's name go, my lord," spluttered Bishop, "and make yourself obeyed. This damned pirate has me by the throat." His lordship surveyed him with an eye that was not by any means admiring. "Why, if that is your wish," he began. Then he shrugged and turned again to Blood. I suppose I can trust you that no harm will come to Colonel Bishop if you are allowed to sail? You have my word for it, said Blood. And also that I shall put him safely ashore again without delay. Lord Julian bowed stiffly to the cowering deputy governor. You understand, sir, that I do as you desire, he said coldly. Aye, man, aye. Bishop assented hastily. Very well. Lord Julian bowed again and took his departure. Blood escorted him to the entrance ladder at the foot of which still swung the Arabella's own cockboat. It's good-bye, my lord, said Blood. And there's another thing. He proffered a parchment that he had drawn from his pocket. It's the commission. Bishop was right when he said it was a mistake. Lord Julian considered him, and considering him his expression softened. I am sorry, he said sincerely. In other circumstances, began Blood. Oh, but there. You'll understand. The boat's waiting. Yet with his foot on the first rung of the ladder, Lord Julian hesitated. I still do not perceive, blister me if I do, why you should not have found someone else to carry your message to the commandant, and kept me aboard as an added hostage for his obedience to your wishes. Blood's vivid eyes looked into the others that were clear and honest, and he smiled, a little wistfully. A moment he seemed to hesitate. Then he explained himself quite fully. Why shouldn't I tell you? It's the same reason that's been urging me to pick a quarrel with you so that I might have the satisfaction of slipping a couple of feet of steel into your vitals. When I accepted your commission, I was moved to think it might redeem me in the eyes of Miss Bishop, for whose sake, as you may have guessed, I took it. But I have discovered that such a thing is beyond accomplishment. I should have known it for a sick man's dream. I have discovered also that if she's choosing you as I believe she is, she's choosing wisely between us. And that's why I'll not have your life risked by keeping you aboard whilst the message goes by another who might bungle it. And now perhaps ye'll understand. Lord Julian stared at him bewildered. His long aristocratic face was very pale. My God, he said. And you tell me this? I tell you because, oh, plague on it, so that ye may tell her, so that she may be made to realize that there's something of the unfortunate gentleman left under the thief and pirate she accounts me, and that her own good is my supreme desire. Knowing that she may remember me more kindly, if it's only in her prayers. That's all, my lord. Lord Julian continued to look at the buccaneer in silence. In silence at last he held out his hand, and in silence Blood took it. I wonder whether you are right, said his lordship, and whether you are not the better man. Where she is concerned, see that you make sure that I am right. Goodbye to you. Lord Julian wrung his hand in silence, went down the ladder and was pulled ashore. From the distance he waved to Blood, who stood leaning on the bulwarks watching the receding cockboat. The Arabella sailed within the hour, moving lazily before a sluggish breeze. The fort remained silent and there was no movement from the fleet to hinder her departure. Lord Julian had carried the message effectively, and had added to it his own personal commands. Chapter 24. 5 miles out at sea from Port Royal, whence the details of the coast of Jamaica were losing their sharpness, the Arabella hove to, and the sloop she had been towing was warped alongside. Captain Blood escorted his compulsory guest to the head of the ladder. Colonel Bishop, who for 2 hours and more had been in a state of mortal anxiety, breathed freely at last, and as the tide of his fears receded, so that of his deep-rooted hate of this audacious buccaneer resumed its normal flow. But he practiced circumspection. If in his heart he vowed that once back in Port Royal there was no effort he would spare, no nerve he would not strain, to bring Peter Blood to final moorings in execution dock, at least he kept that vow strictly to himself. Peter Blood had no illusions. He was not and never would be the complete pirate. There was not another buccaneer in all the Caribbean who would have denied himself the pleasure of stringing Colonel Bishop from the yardarm, and by thus finally stifling the vindictive planter's hatred have increased his own security. But Blood was not of these. Moreover, in the case of Colonel Bishop there was a particular reason for restraint. Because he was Arabella Bishop's uncle, his life must remain sacred to Captain Blood. And so the captain smiled into the sallow, bloated face and the little eyes that fixed him with a malevolence not to be dissembled. A safe voyage home to you, Colonel darling, said he in valediction, and from his easy, smiling manner you would never have dreamt of the pain he carried in his breast. It's the second time you've served me for a hostage. You'll be well advised to avoid a third. I'm not lucky to you, Colonel, as you should be perceiving. Jeremy Pitt, the master, lounging at Blood's elbow, looked darkly upon the departure of the deputy governor. Behind them a little mob of grim, stalwart, suntanned buccaneers were restrained from cracking Bishop like a flea only by their submission to the dominant will of their leader. They had learnt from Pitt while yet in Port Royal of their captain's danger, and whilst as ready as he to throw over the king's service which had been thrust upon them, yet they resented the manner in which this had been rendered necessary, and they marvelled now at Blood's restraint where Bishop was concerned. The deputy governor looked round and met the lowering hostile glances of those fierce eyes. Instinct warned him that his life at that moment was held precariously, that an injudicious word might precipitate an explosion of hatred from which no human power could save him. Therefore he said nothing. He inclined his head in silence to the captain, and went blundering and stumbling in his haste down that ladder to the sloop and its waiting negro crew. They pushed off the craft from the red hull of the Arabella, bent to their sweeps, then hoisting sail, headed back for Port Royal, intent upon reaching it before darkness should come down upon them. And Bishop, the great bulk of him huddled in the stern sheets, sat silent, his black brows knitted, his coarse lips pursed, malevolence and vindictiveness so whelming now his recent panic that he forgot his near escape of the yardarm in the running noose. On the mole at Port Royal, under the low embattled wall of the fort, Major Mallard and Lord Julian waited to receive him, and it was with infinite relief that they assisted him from the sloop. Major Mallard was disposed to be apologetic. "Glad to see you safe, sir," said he. "I'd have sunk Blood's ship in spite of your excellencies being aboard but for your own orders by Lord Julian, and his lordship's assurance that he had Blood's word for it that no harm should come to you so that no harm came to him. I'll confess I thought it rash of his lordship to accept the word of a damned pirate." "I have found it as good as another's," said his lordship, cropping the major's too eager eloquence. He spoke with an unusual degree of that frosty dignity he could assume upon occasion. The fact is that his lordship was in an exceedingly bad humor. Having written jubilantly home to the Secretary of State that his mission had succeeded, he was now faced with the necessity of writing again to confess that this success had been ephemeral. And because Major Mallard's crisp mustachios were lifted by a sneer at the notion of a buccaneer's word being acceptable, he added still more sharply, "My justification is here in the person of Colonel Bishop safely returned. As against that, sir, your opinion does not weigh for very much. You should realize it. Oh, as your lordship says." Major Mallard's manner was tinged with irony. "To be sure, here is the colonel safe and sound. And out yonder is Captain Blood, also safe and sound, to begin his piratical ravages all over again. I do not propose to discuss the reasons with you, Major Mallard. And anyway it's not for long," growled the colonel, finding speech at last. "No, by—" He emphasized the assurance by an unprintable oath. "If I spend the last shilling of my fortune and the last ship of the Jamaica fleet, I'll have that rascal in a hempen necktie before I rest. And I'll not be long about it." He had empurpled in his angry vehemence, and the veins of his forehead stood out like whipcord. Then he checked. "You did well to follow Lord Julian's instructions," he commended the major. With that he turned from him and took his lordship by the arm. "Come, my lord. We must take order about this, you and I." They went off together, skirting the redoubt, and so through courtyard and garden to the house where Arabella waited anxiously. The sight of her uncle brought her infinite relief, not only on his own account, but on account also of Captain Blood. "You took a great risk, sir," she gravely told Lord Julian after the ordinary greetings had been exchanged. But Lord Julian answered her as he had answered Major Mallard. "There was no risk, ma'am." She looked at him in some astonishment. His long, aristocratic face wore a more melancholy, pensive air than usual. He answered the inquiry in her glance. "So that Blood's ship were allowed to pass the fort, no harm could come to Colonel Bishop. Blood pledged me his word for that." A faint smile broke the set of her lips, which hitherto had been wistful, and a little color tinged her cheeks. She would have pursued the subject, but the deputy governor's mood did not permit it. He sneered and snorted at the notion of Blood's word being good for anything, forgetting that he owed to it his own preservation at that moment. At supper, and for long thereafter, he talked of nothing but Blood, of how he would lay him by the heels, and what hideous things he would perform upon his body. And as he drank heavily the while, his speech became increasingly gross and his threats increasingly horrible, until in the end Arabella withdrew, white-faced and almost on the verge of tears. It was not often that Bishop revealed himself to his niece. Oddly enough, this coarse, overbearing planter went in a certain awe of that slim girl. It was as if she had inherited from her father the respect in which he had always been held by his brother. Lord Julian, who began to find Bishop disgusting beyond endurance, excused himself soon after, and went in quest of the lady. He had yet to deliver the message from Captain Blood, and this, he thought, would be his opportunity. But Miss Bishop had retired for the night, and Lord Julian must curb his impatience, it amounted by now to nothing less, until the morrow. Very early next morning, before the heat of the day came to render the open intolerable to his lordship, he espied her from his window moving amid the azaleas in the garden. It was a fitting setting for one who was still as much a delightful novelty to him in womanhood as was the azalea among flowers. He hurried forth to join her, and when, aroused from her pensiveness, she had given him a good morrow, smiling and frank, he explained himself by the announcement that he bore her a message from Captain Blood. He observed her little start and the slight quiver of her lips, and observed thereafter not only her pallor and the shadowy rings about her eyes, but also that unusually wistful air which last night had escaped his notice. They moved out of the open to one of the terraces, where a pergola of orange trees provided a shaded sauntering space that was at once cool and fragrant. As they went, he considered her admiringly, and marveled at himself that it should have taken him so long fully to realize her slim, unusual grace, and to find her, as he now did, so entirely desirable, a woman whose charm must irradiate all the life of a man, and touch its commonplaces into magic. He noted the sheen of her red-brown hair, and how gracefully one of its heavy ringlets coiled upon her slender, milk-white neck. She wore a gown of shimmering gray silk, and a scarlet rose, fresh gathered, was pinned at her breast like a splash of blood. Always thereafter when he thought of her it was as he saw her at that moment, as never, I think, until that moment had he seen her. In silence they paced on a little way into the green shade. Then she paused and faced him. "You said something of a message, sir," she reminded him, thus betraying some of her impatience. He fingered the ringlets of his periwig, a little embarrassed how to deliver himself, considering how he should begin. "He desired me," he said at last, "to give you a message that should prove to you that there is still something left in him of the unfortunate gentleman that, for which once you knew him." "That is not now necessary," said she very gravely. He misunderstood her, of course, knowing nothing of the enlightenment that yesterday had come to her. "I think, nay, I know that you do him an injustice," said he. Her hazel eyes continued to regard him. "If you will deliver the message it may enable me to judge." To him this was confusing. He did not immediately answer. He found that he had not sufficiently considered the terms he should employ, and the matter, after all, was of an exceeding delicacy, demanding delicate handling. It was not so much that he was concerned to deliver a message as to render it a vehicle by which to plead his own cause. Lord Julian, well versed in the lore of womankind and usually at his ease with ladies of the beau monde, found himself oddly constrained before this frank and unsophisticated niece of a colonial planter. They moved on in silence and as if by common consent towards the brilliant sunshine where the pergola was intersected by the avenue leading upwards to the house. Across this patch of light fluttered a gorgeous butterfly, that was like black and scarlet velvet and large as a man's hand. His lordship's brooding eyes followed it out of sight before he answered. "It is not easy. Stab me, it is not. He was a man who deserved well. And amongst us we have marred his chances. Your uncle, because he could not forget his rancor. You, because having told him that in the king's service he would find his redemption of what was past, you would not afterwards admit to him that he was so redeemed. And this, although concerned to rescue you, was the chief motive of his embracing that same service." She had turned her shoulder to him so that he should not see her face. "I know now," she said softly. Then after a pause she added the question, "And you? What part has your lordship had in this, that you should incriminate yourself with us?" "My part." Again he hesitated, then plunged recklessly on, as men do when determined to perform a thing they fear. "If I understood him aright, if he understood aright himself, my part, though entirely passive, was none the less effective. I implore you to observe that I but report his own words. I say nothing for myself." His lordship's unusual nervousness was steadily increasing. He thought then, so he told me, that my presence here had contributed to his inability to redeem himself in your sight, and unless he were so redeemed, then was redemption nothing. She faced him fully, a frown of perplexity bringing her brows together above her troubled eyes. "He thought that you had contributed?" she echoed. It was clear she asked for enlightenment. He plunged on to afford it her, his glance a little scared, his cheeks flushing. "Aye, and he said so in terms which told me something that I hope above all things, and yet dare not believe, for God knows I am no coxcomb, Arabella. He said, but first let me tell you how I was placed. I had gone aboard his ship to demand the instant surrender of your uncle whom he held captive. He laughed at me. Colonel Bishop should be a hostage for his safety. By rashly venturing aboard his ship, I afforded him in my own person yet another hostage as valuable at least as Colonel Bishop. Yet he bade me depart, Not from the fear of consequences, for he is above fear, nor from any personal esteem for me whom he confessed that he had come to find detestable, and this for the very reason that made him concerned for my safety. I do not understand, she said as he paused. Is not that a contradiction in itself? It seems so only. The fact is, Arabella, this unfortunate man has the temerity to love you. She cried out at that, and clutched her breast whose calm was suddenly disturbed. Her eyes dilated as she stared at him. I've startled you, said he with concern. I feared I should. But it was necessary so that you may understand. Go on, she bade him. Well then, he saw in me one who made it impossible that he should win you, so he said. Therefore he could with satisfaction have killed me. But because my death might cause you pain, because your happiness was the thing that above all things he desired, he surrendered that part of his guarantee of safety which my person afforded him. If his departure should be hindered and I should lose my life in what might follow, there was the risk that you might mourn me. That risk he would not take. Him you deemed a thief and a pirate, he said, and added that, I am giving you his own words always. If in choosing between us two your choice as he believed would fall on me, then were you in his opinion choosing wisely. Because of that he bade me leave his ship, and had me put ashore. She looked at him with eyes that were aswim with tears. He took a step towards her, a catch in his breath, his hand held out. Was he right, Arabella? My life's happiness hangs upon your answer. But she continued silently to regard him with those tear-laden eyes, without speaking, and until she spoke he dared not advance farther. A tormenting doubt beset him. When presently she spoke, he saw how true had been the instinct of which that doubt was born, for her words revealed the fact that of all that he had said the only thing that had touched her consciousness and absorbed it from all other considerations was Blood's conduct as it regarded herself. He said that, she cried. He did that. Oh. She turned away, and through the slender, clustering trunks of the bordering orange trees she looked out across the glittering waters of the great harbor to the distant hills. Thus for a little while, my lord standing stiffly, fearfully, waiting for fuller revelation of her mind. At last it came, slowly, deliberately, in a voice that at moments was half suffocated. Last night when my uncle displayed his rancor and his evil rage, it began to be borne in upon me that such vindictiveness can belong only to those who have wronged. It is the frenzy into which men whip themselves to justify an evil passion. I must have known then, if I had not already learnt it, that I had been too credulous of all the unspeakable things attributed to Peter Blood. Yesterday I had his own explanation of that tale of Levasseur that you heard in St. Nicholas. And now this but gives me confirmation of his truth and worth. To a scoundrel such as I was too readily brought to believe him, the act of which you have just told me would have been impossible. That is my own opinion, said his lordship gently. It must be. But even if it were not, that would now weigh for nothing. What weighs, oh, so heavily and bitterly, is the thought that but for the words in which yesterday I repelled him, he might have been saved. If only I could have spoken to him again before he went. I waited for him, but my uncle was with him, and I had no suspicion that he was going away again. And now he is lost, back at his outlawry and piracy, in which ultimately he will be taken and destroyed. And the fault is mine. What are you saying? The only agents were your uncle's hostility and his own obstinacy which would not study compromise. You must not blame yourself for anything. She swung to him with some impatience, her eyes aswim in tears. You can say that, and in spite of his message which in itself tells how much I was to blame. It was my treatment of him, the epithets I cast at him that drove him. So much he has told you. I know it to be true. You have no cause for shame, said he. As for your sorrow, why, if it will afford you solace, you may still count on me to do what man can to rescue him from this position. She caught her breath. You will do that, she cried with sudden eager hopefulness. You promise? She held out her hand to him impulsively. He took it in both his own. I promise, he answered her. And then, retaining still the hand she had surrendered to him, Arabella, he said very gently, there is still this other matter upon which you have not answered me. This other matter? Was he mad, she wondered. Could any other matter signify in such a moment? This matter that concerns myself, and all my future, oh, so very closely. This thing that Blood believed that prompted him, that you are not indifferent to me. He saw the fair face change color and grow troubled once more. Indifferent to you? Said she. Why no. We have been good friends, we shall continue so, I hope, my lord. Friends? Good friends? He was between dismay and bitterness. It is not your friendship only that I ask, Arabella. You heard what I said, what I reported. You will not say that Peter Blood was wrong? Gently she sought to disengage her hand, the trouble in her face increasing. A moment he resisted, then realizing what he did, he set her free. Arabella, he cried on a note of sudden pain. I have friendship for you, my lord. But only friendship. His castle of hopes came clattering down about him, leaving him a little stunned. As he had said, he was no coxcomb. Yet there was something that he did not understand. She confessed to friendship, and it was in his power to offer her a great position, one to which she, a colonial planter's niece however wealthy, could never have aspired even in her dreams. This she rejected, yet spoke of friendship. Peter Blood had been mistaken then. How far had he been mistaken? Had he been as mistaken in her feelings towards himself as he obviously was in her feelings towards his lordship? In that case, his reflections broke short. To speculate was to wound himself in vain. He must know. Therefore he asked her with grim frankness, Is it Peter Blood? Peter Blood? She echoed. At first she did not understand the purport of his question. When understanding came, a flush suffused her face. I do not know, she said, faltering a little. This was hardly a truthful answer. For, as if an obscuring veil had suddenly been rent that morning, she was permitted at last to see Peter Blood in his true relations to other men, and that sight, vouchsafed her 24 hours too late, filled her with pity and regret and yearning. Lord Julian knew enough of women to be left in no further doubt. He bowed his head so that she might not see the anger in his eyes, for as a man of honor he took shame in that anger which as a human being he could not repress. And because nature in him was stronger, as it is in most of us, than training, Lord Julian from that moment began, almost in spite of himself, to practice something that was akin to villainy. I regret to chronicle it of one for whom, if I have done him any sort of justice, you should have been conceiving some esteem. But the truth is that the lingering remains of the regard in which he had held Peter Blood were choked by the desire to supplant and destroy a rival. He had passed his word to Arabella that he would use his powerful influence on Blood's behalf. I deplore to set it down that not only did he forget his pledge, but secretly set himself to aid and abet Arabella's uncle in the plans he laid for the trapping and undoing of the buccaneer. He might reasonably have urged, had he been taxed with it, that he conducted himself precisely as his duty demanded. But to that he might have been answered that duty with him was but the slave of jealousy in this. When the Jamaica fleet put to sea some few days later, Lord Julian sailed with Colonel Bishop and Vice Admiral Crawford's flagship. Not only was there no need for either of them to go, but the deputy governor's duties actually demanded that he should remain ashore, whilst Lord Julian, as we know, was a useless man aboard a ship. Yet both set out to hunt Captain Blood, each making of his duty a pretext for the satisfaction of personal aims, and that common purpose became a link between them, binding them in a sort of friendship that must otherwise have been impossible between men so dissimilar in breeding and in aspirations. The hunt was up. They cruised a while off Hispaniola, watching the windward passage, and suffering the discomforts of the rainy season which had now set in. But they cruised in vain, and after a month of it, returned empty-handed to Port Royal, there to find awaiting them the most disquieting news from the Old World. The megalomania of Louis XIV had set Europe in a blaze of war. The French legionaries were ravaging the Rhine provinces, and Spain had joined the nations leagued to defend themselves from the wild ambitions of the King of France. And there was worse than this. There were rumors of civil war in England, where the people had grown weary of the bigoted tyranny of King James. It was reported that William of Orange had been invited to come over. Weeks passed and every ship from home brought additional news. William had crossed to England, and in March of that year 1689 they learnt in Jamaica that he had accepted the crown and that James had thrown himself into the arms of France for rehabilitation. To a kinsman of Sunderland's this was disquieting news indeed. It was followed by letters from King William's Secretary of State informing Colonel Bishop that there was war with France, and that in view of its effect upon the colonies a Governor-General was coming out to the West Indies in the person of Lord Willoughby, and that with him came a squadron under the command of Admiral van der Kuylen to reinforce the Jamaica fleet against eventualities. Bishop realized that this must mean the end of his supreme authority, even though he should continue in Port Royal as deputy governor. Lord Julian, in the lack of direct news to himself, did not know what it might mean to him. But he had been very close and confidential with Colonel Bishop regarding his hopes of Arabella, and Colonel Bishop more than ever, now that political events put him in danger of being retired, was anxious to enjoy the advantages of having a man of Lord Julian's eminence for his relative. They came to a complete understanding in the matter, and Lord Julian disclosed all that he knew. "There is one obstacle in our path," said he. "Captain Blood. The girl is in love with him." "You're surely mad," cried Bishop when he had recovered speech. "You are justified of the assumption," said his lordship dolefully. "But I happen to be sane and to speak with knowledge." "With knowledge? Arabella herself has confessed it to me. The brazen baggage. By God, I'll bring her to her senses. It was the slave driver speaking, the man who governed with a whip. Don't be a fool, Bishop." His lordship's contempt did more than any argument to calm the colonel. "That's not the way with a girl of Arabella's spirit. Unless you want to wreck my chances for all time, you'll hold your tongue and not interfere at all." "Not interfere? My God, what then?" "Listen, man. She has a constant mind. I don't think you know your niece. As long as Blood lives, she will wait for him. Then with Blood dead, perhaps she will come to her silly senses." "Now you begin to show intelligence," Lord Julian commended him. "That is the first essential step. And here is our chance to take it." Bishop warmed to a sort of enthusiasm. "This war with France removes all restrictions in the matter of Tortuga. We are free to invest it in the service of the crown. A victory there and we establish ourselves in the favor of this new government." "Ah," said Lord Julian, and he pulled thoughtfully at his lip. "I see that you understand." Bishop laughed coarsely. "Two birds with one stone, eh? We'll hunt this rascal in his lair, right under the beard of the King of France, and we'll take him this time, if we reduce Tortuga to a heap of ashes." On that expedition they sailed 2 days later, which would be some 3 months after Blood's departure, taking every ship of the fleet and several lesser vessels as auxiliaries. To Arabella and the world in general it was given out that they were going to raid French Hispaniola, which was really the only expedition that could have afforded Colonel Bishop any sort of justification for leaving Jamaica at all at such a time. His sense of duty indeed should have kept him fast in Port Royal, but his sense of duty was smothered in hatred, that most fruitless and corruptive of all the emotions. In the great cabin of Vice Admiral Crawford's flagship, the Imperator, the deputy governor got drunk that night to celebrate his conviction that the sands of Captain Blood's career were running out. Chapter 25. The Service of King Louis. Meanwhile, some 3 months before Colonel Bishop set out to reduce Tortuga, Captain Blood, bearing hell in his soul, had blown into its rock-bound harbor ahead of the winter gales, and 2 days ahead of the frigate in which Wolverstone had sailed from Port Royal a day before him. In that snug anchorage he found his fleet awaiting him, the 4 ships which had been separated in that gale off the Lesser Antilles, and some 700 men composing their crews. Because they had been beginning to grow anxious on his behalf, they gave him the greater welcome. Guns were fired in his honor and the ships made themselves gay with bunting. The town, aroused by all this noise in the harbor, emptied itself upon the jetty, and a vast crowd of men and women of all creeds and nationalities collected there to be present at the coming ashore of the great buccaneer. Ashore he went, probably for no other reason than to obey the general expectation. His mood was taciturn, his face grim and sneering. Let Wolverstone arrive as presently he would, and all this hero worship would turn to execration. His captains, Hagthorpe, Christian, and Iberville, were on the jetty to receive him, and with them were some hundreds of his buccaneers. He cut short their greetings, and when they plagued him with questions of where he had tarried, he bade them await the coming of Wolverstone, who would satisfy their curiosity to a surfeit. On that he shook them off, and shouldered his way through that heterogeneous throng that was composed of bustling traders of several nations, English, French, and Dutch, of planters and of seamen of various degrees, of buccaneers who were fruit-selling half-castes, Negro slaves, some dull tearsheets and dunghill queens from the Old World, and all the other types of the human family that converted the quays of Cayona into a disreputable image of Babel. Winning clear at last, and after difficulties, Captain Blood took his way alone to the fine house of M. D'Ogeron, there to pay his respects to his friends, the governor and the governor's family. At first the buccaneers jumped to the conclusion that Wolverstone was following with some rare prize of war, but gradually from the reduced crew of the Arabella a very different tale leaked out to stem their satisfaction and convert it into perplexity. Partly out of loyalty to their captain, partly because they perceived that if he was guilty of defection they were guilty with him, and partly because being simple, sturdy men of their hands, they were themselves in the main a little confused as to what really had happened. The crew of the Arabella practiced reticence with their brethren in Tortuga during those 2 days before Wolverstone's arrival. But they were not reticent enough to prevent the circulation of certain uneasy rumors and extravagant stories of discreditable adventures. Discreditable, that is, from the buccaneering point of view, of which Captain Blood had been guilty. But that Wolverstone came when he did, it is possible that there would have been an explosion. When, however, the Old Wolf cast anchor in the bay 2 days later, It was to him all turned for the explanation they were about to demand of Blood. Now Wolverstone had only one eye, but he saw a deal more with that one eye than do most men with two, and despite his grizzled head, so picturesquely swathed in a green and scarlet turban, he had the sound heart of a boy, and in that heart much love for Peter Blood. The sight of the Arabella at anchor in the bay had at first amazed him as he sailed round the rocky headland that bore the fort. He rubbed his single eye clear of any deceiving film and looked again. Still he could not believe what it saw. And then a voice at his elbow, the voice of Dyke, who had elected to sail with him, assured him that he was not singular in his bewilderment. "In the name of heaven, is that the Arabella or is it the ghost of her?" The old wolf rolled his single eye over Dyke and opened his mouth to speak. Then he closed it again without having spoken, closed it tightly. He had a great gift of caution, especially in matters that he did not understand. That this was the Arabella he could no longer doubt. That being so, he must think before he spoke. What the devil should the Arabella be doing here, when he had left her in Jamaica? And was Captain Blood aboard and in command, or had the remainder of her hands made off with her, leaving the captain in Port Royal? Dyke repeated his question. This time Wolverstone answered him. "Ye've two eyes to see with, and ye ask me who's only got one what it is ye see. But I see the Arabella. Of course, since there she rides. What else was you expecting?" "Expecting?" Dyke stared at him open-mouthed. "Was you expecting to find the Arabella here?" Wolverstone looked him over in contempt, then laughed and spoke loud enough to be heard by all around him. "Of course. What else?" And he laughed again, a laugh that seemed to Dyke to be calling him a fool. On that Wolverstone turned to give his attention to the operation of anchoring. Anon when ashore he was beset by questioning buccaneers. It was from their very questions that he gathered exactly how matters stood, and perceived that either from lack of courage or other motive Blood himself had refused to render any account of his doings since the Arabella had separated from her sister ships. Wolverstone congratulated himself upon the discretion he had used with Dyke. The captain was ever a modest man, he explained to Hagthorpe and those others who came crowding round him. It's not his way to be sounding his own praises. Why, it was like this. We fell in with old Don Miguel, and when we'd scuttled him we took aboard a London pimp sent out by the Secretary of State to offer the captain the king's commission if so be him'd quit piracy and be o' good behavior. The captain damned his soul to hell for answer. And then we fell in the Jamaica fleet and that grey old devil Bishop in command, and there was a sure end to Captain Blood and to every mother's son of us all. So I goes to him and accept this poxy commission, says I, turn king's man and save your neck and ours. He took me at my word, and the London pimp gave him the king's commission on the spot, and Bishop all but choked himself with rage when he was told of it. But happened it had, and he was forced to swallow it. We were king's men all, and so into Port Royal we sailed along o' Bishop. But Bishop didn't trust us. He knew too much. But for his lordship, the fellow from London, he'd ha hanged the captain, king's commission and all. Blood would ha slipped out o' Port Royal again that same night. But that hound Bishop had passed the word, and the fort kept a sharp lookout. In the end, though it took a fortnight, Blood bubbled him. He sent me and most of the men off in a frigate that I bought for the voyage. His game, as he'd secretly told me, was to follow and give chase. Whether that's the game he played or not I can't tell ye, but here he is afore me as I'd expected he would be. There was a great historian lost in Wolverstone. He had the right imagination that knows just how far it is safe to stray from the truth and just how far to color it so as to change its shape for his own purposes. Having delivered himself of his decoction of fact and falsehood, and thereby added one more to the exploits of Peter Blood, he inquired where the captain might be found. Being informed that he kept his ship, Wolverstone stepped into a boat and went aboard to report himself, as he put it. In the great cabin of the Arabella he found Peter Blood alone and very far gone in drink, a condition in which no man ever before remembered to have seen him. As Wolverstone came in, the captain raised bloodshot eyes to consider him. A moment they sharpened in their gaze as he brought his visitor into focus. Then he laughed, a loose, idiot laugh that yet somehow was half a sneer. "Ah, the old wolf," said he. "Got here at last, eh? And what share Gnurdo why me, eh?" He hiccuped resoundingly and sagged back loosely in his chair. Old Wolverstone stared at him in somber silence. He had looked with untroubled eye upon many a hell of devilment in his time, but the sight of Captain Blood in this condition filled him with sudden grief. To express it he loosed an oath. It was his only expression for emotion of all kinds. Then he rolled forward and dropped into a chair at the table, facing the captain. "My God, Peter, what's this?" "Rum," said Peter. "Rum from Jamaica." He pushed bottle and glass towards Wolverstone. Wolverstone disregarded them. "I'm asking you what ails you," he bawled. "Rum," said Captain Blood again and smiled. "Just rum. I answer all your questions. Why don't you answer mine? What share Gennardo, why me?" "I've done it," said Wolverstone. "Thank God ye had the sense to hold your tongue till I came. Are ye sober enough to understand me? Drunk or sober, I'll understand you." "Then listen." And out came the tale that Wolverstone had told. The captain steadied himself to grasp it. "It'll do as well, Assertruth," said he when Wolverstone had finished. "And, oh no more. Much obliged to ye, old wolf, faithful old wolf. But was it worth the trouble? I'm no a pirate now, never a pirate again." As finished, he banged the table, his eyes suddenly fierce. "I'll come and talk to you again when there's less rum in your wits," said Wolverstone, rising. "Meanwhile ye'll please to remember the tale I've told, and say nothing that'll make me out a liar. They all believes me, even the men as sailed wi' me from Port Royal. I've made 'em. If they thought as how you'd taken the king's commission in earnest, and for the purpose of doing as Morgan did, ye guess what would follow." "Hell would follow," said the captain. "And that's all I'm fit for." "Ye're maudlin," Wolverstone growled. "We'll talk again tomorrow." They did, but to little purpose either that day or on any day thereafter while the rains, which set in that night, endured. Soon the shrewd Wolverstone discovered that rum was not what ailed Blood. Rum was in itself an effect, and not by any means the cause of the captain's listless apathy. There was a canker eating at his heart, and the old wolf knew enough to make a shrewd guess of its nature. He cursed all things that daggled petticoats, and knowing his world, waited for the sickness to pass. But it did not pass. When Blood was not dicing or drinking in the taverns of Tortuga, keeping company that in his saner days he had loathed, he was shut up in his cabin aboard the Arabella, alone and uncommunicative. His friends at Government House, bewildered at this change in him, sought to reclaim him. Mademoiselle d'Ogeron, particularly distressed, sent him almost daily invitations, to few of which he responded. Later, as the rainy season approached its end, he was sought by his captains with proposals of remunerative raids on Spanish settlements. But to all he manifested an indifference which, as the weeks passed and the weather became settled, begot first impatience and then exasperation. Christian, who commanded the Clotho, came storming to him one day, upbraiding him for his inaction, and demanding that he should take order about what was to do. "Go to the devil," Blood said when he had heard him out. Christian departed fuming, and on the morrow the Clotho weighed anchor and sailed away, setting an example of desertion from which the loyalty of Blood's other captains would soon be unable to restrain their men. Sometimes Blood asked himself why had he come back to Tortuga at all. Held fast in bondage by the thought of Arabella and her scorn of him for a thief and a pirate, he had sworn that he had done with buccaneering. Why then was he here? That question he would answer with another. Where else was he to go? Neither backward nor forward could he move, it seemed. He was degenerating visibly under the eyes of all. He had entirely lost the almost foppish concern for his appearance, and was grown careless and slovenly in his dress. He allowed a black beard to grow on cheeks that had ever been so carefully shaven, and the long thick black hair, once so sedulously curled, hung now in a lank, untidy mane about a face that was changing from its vigorous swarthiness to an unhealthy sallow, whilst the blue eyes, that had been so vivid and compelling, were now dull and lackluster. Wolverstone, the only one who held the clue to this degeneration, ventured once, and once only, to beard him frankly about it. "Lord Peter, is there never to be no end to this?" the giant had growled. "Will you spend your days moping and swilling, 'cause a white-faced ninny in Port Royal have none o' ye? Splod and downs. If ye wants the wench, why the plague doesn't ye go and fetch her?" The blue eyes glared at him from under the jet-black eyebrows, and something of their old fire began to kindle in them. But Wolverstone went on heedlessly. "I'll be nice, why, a wench as long as niceness be the key to her favor. But sink me now if I'd rot myself in rum on account of anything that wears a petticoat. That's not the old wolf's way. If there's no other expedition'll tempt you, why not Port Royal? What a plague do it matter if it is an English settlement? It's commanded by Colonel Bishop, and there's no lack of rascals in your company'd follow you to hell if it meant getting Colonel Bishop by the throat. Could be done, I tell you. We've but to spy the chance when the Jamaica fleet is away. There's enough plunder in the town to tempt the lads, and there's the wench for you. Shall I sound them on tea?" Blood was on his feet, his eyes blazing, his livid face distorted. "Ye'll leave my cabin this minute, so ye will, or by heaven, it's your corpse'll be carried out of it. Ye mangy hound, d'ye dare come to me with such proposals? He fell to cursing his faithful officer with a virulence the like of which he had never yet been known to use. And Wolverstone, in terror before that fury, went out without another word. The subject was not raised again, and Captain Blood was left to his idle abstraction. But at last, as his buccaneers were growing desperate, something happened, brought about by the captain's friend M. d'Ogeron. One sunny morning the governor of Tortuga came aboard the Arabella, accompanied by a chubby little gentleman, amiable of countenance, amiable and self-sufficient of manner. "My captain," M. d'Ogeron delivered himself, "I bring you M. de Cussy, the governor of French Hispaniola, who desires a word with you." Out of consideration for his friend, Captain Blood pulled the pipe from his mouth, shook some of the rum out of his wits, and rose and made a leg to M. de Cussy. "Serviteur," said he. De Cussy returned the bow and accepted a seat on the locker under the stem windows. "You have a good force here under your command, my captain," said he. "Some 800 men. And I understand they grow restive in idleness. They may go to the devil when they please." De Cussy took snuff delicately. "I have something better than that to propose," said he. "Propose it then," said Blood without interest. De Cussy looked at M. d'Ogeron and raised his eyebrows a little. He did not find Captain Blood encouraging. But M. d'Ogeron nodded vigorously with pursed lips, and the governor of Hispaniola propounded his business. "News has reached us from France that there is war with Spain." "That is news, is it?" growled Blood. "I am speaking officially, my captain. I am not alluding to unofficial skirmishes and unofficial predatory measures which we have condoned out here. There is war, formally war, between France and Spain in Europe. It is the intention of France that this war shall be carried into the New World. A fleet is coming out from Brest under the command of M. le Baron de Rivarol for that purpose. I have letters from him desiring me to equip a supplementary squadron and raise a body of not less than 1,000 men to reinforce him on his arrival. What I have come to propose to you, my captain, at the suggestion of our good friend M. d'Ogeron, is, in brief, that you enroll your ships and your force under M. de Rivarol's flag." Blood looked at him with a faint kindling of interest. "You are offering to take us into the French service?" he asked. "On what terms, monsieur?" "With the rank of Capitaine de Vaisseau for yourself, and suitable ranks for the officers serving under you. You will enjoy the pay of that rank, and you will be entitled, together with your men, to 1/10 share in all prizes taken. My men will hardly account it generous. They will tell you that they can sail out of here tomorrow, disembowel a Spanish settlement, and keep the whole of the plunder. Ah, yes, but with the risks attaching to acts of piracy. With us your position will be regular and official, and considering the powerful fleet by which M. de Rivarol is backed, the enterprises to be undertaken will be on a much vaster scale than anything you could attempt on your own account, so that the 1/10 in this case may be equal to more than the whole in the other." Captain Blood considered. This, after all, was not piracy that was being proposed. It was honorable employment in the service of the King of France. "I will consult my officers," he said, and he sent for them. They came and the matter was laid before them by M. de Cussy himself. Hagthorpe announced at once that the proposal was opportune. The men were grumbling at their protracted inaction, and would no doubt be ready to accept the service which M. de Cussy offered on behalf of France. Hagthorpe looked at Blood as he spoke. Blood nodded gloomy agreement. Emboldened by this, they went on to discuss the terms. Iberville, the young French filibuster, had the honor to point out to M. de Cussy that the share offered was too small. For 1/5 of the prizes the officers would answer for their men, not for less. De Cussy was distressed. He had his instructions. It was taking a deal upon himself to exceed them. The buccaneers were firm. Unless M. de Cussy could make it 1/5, there was no more to be said. De Cussy finally consenting to exceed his instructions, the articles were drawn up and signed that very day. The buccaneers were to be at Petit Gove by the end of January, when M. de Rivarol had announced that he might be expected. After that followed days of activity in Tortuga, refitting the ships, boucanning meat, laying in stores. In these matters which once would have engaged all Captain Blood's attention, he now took no part. He continued listless and aloof. If he had given his consent to the undertaking, or rather, allowed himself to be swept into it by the wishes of his officers, it was only because the service offered was of a regular and honorable kind, nowise connected with piracy, with which he swore in his heart that he had done forever. But his consent remained passive. The service entered awoke no zeal in him. He was perfectly indifferent, as he told Hagthorpe, who ventured once to offer a remonstrance, whether they went to Petit Gove or to Hades. and whether they entered the service of Louis XIV or of Satan. Chapter 26. De Rivarol. Captain Blood was still in that disgruntled mood when he sailed from Tortuga, and still in that mood when he came to his moorings in the Bay of Petit Gove. In that same mood he greeted le Baron de Rivarol when this nobleman with his fleet of 5 men of war at last dropped anchor alongside the buccaneer ships, in the middle of February. The Frenchman had been 6 weeks on the voyage, he announced, delayed by unfavorable weather. Summoned to wait on him, Captain Blood repaired to the castle of Petit Gove, where the interview was to take place. The Baron, a tall, hawk-faced man of 40, very cold and distant of manner, measured Captain Blood with an eye of obvious disapproval. Of Hagthorpe, Iberville, and Wolverstone, who stood ranged behind their captain, he took no heed whatever. De Cussy offered Captain Blood a chair. "A moment, De Cussy. I do not think le Baron has observed that I am not alone. Let me present to you, sir, my companions, Captain Hagthorpe of the Elizabeth, Captain Wolverstone of the Atropos, and Captain Iberville of the Lachesis." The Baron stared hard and haughtily at Captain Blood, then very distantly and barely perceptibly inclined his head to each of the other 3. His manner implied plainly that he despised them and that he desired them at once to understand it. It had a curious effect upon Captain Blood. It awoke the devil in him, and it awoke at the same time his self-respect which of late had been slumbering. A sudden shame of his disordered, ill-kempt appearance made him perhaps the more defiant. There was almost a significance in the way he hitched his sword belt round, so that the wrought hilt of his very serviceable rapier was brought into fuller view. He waved his captains to the chairs that stood about. "Draw up to the table, lads. We are keeping the Baron waiting." They obeyed him, Wolverstone with a grin that was full of understanding. Haughtier grew the stare of de Rivarol. To sit at table with these bandits placed him upon what he accounted a dishonoring equality. It had been his notion that, with the possible exception of Captain Blood, they should take his instructions standing, as became men of their quality in the presence of a man of his. He did the only thing remaining to mark a distinction between himself and them. He put on his hat. "You're very wise now," said Blood amiably. "I feel the draught myself." And he covered himself with his plumed castor. De Rivarol changed color. He quivered visibly with anger, and was a moment controlling himself before venturing to speak. De Cussy was obviously very ill at ease. "Sir," said the Baron frostily, "you compel me to remind you that the rank you hold is that of Capitaine de Vaisseau, and that you are in the presence of the General of the armies of France by sea and land in America. You compel me to remind you further that there is a deference due from your rank to mine." "I am happy to assure you," said Captain Blood, "that the reminder is unnecessary. I am by way of accounting myself a gentleman, little though I may look like one at present, and I should not account myself that were I capable of anything but deference to those whom nature or fortune may have placed above me, or to those who being placed beneath me in rank may labor under a disability to resent my lack of it." It was a neatly intangible rebuke. De Rivarol bit his lip. Captain Blood swept on without giving him time to reply. "Thus much being clear, shall we come to business?" De Rivarol's hard eyes considered him a moment. "Perhaps it will be best," said he. He took up a paper. "I have here a copy of the articles into which you entered with de Cussy. Before going further, I have to observe that de Cussy has exceeded his instructions in admitting you to 1/5 of the prizes taken. His authority did not warrant his going beyond 1/10. That is a matter between yourself and de Cussy, my general." "Oh no. It is a matter between myself and you." "Your pardon, my general. The articles are signed. So far as we are concerned, the matter is closed. Also out of regard for de Cussy, we should not desire to be witnesses of the rebukes you may consider that he deserves. What I may have to say to de Cussy is no concern of yours. That is what I am telling you, my general. But, nom de Dieu, it is your concern, I suppose, that we cannot award you more than 1/10 share." De Rivarol smote the table in exasperation. This pirate was too infernally skillful a fencer. "You are quite certain of that, le Baron, that you cannot?" "I am quite certain that I will not." Captain Blood shrugged and looked down his nose. "In that case," said he, "it but remains for me to present my little account for our disbursement, and to fix the sum at which we should be compensated for our loss of time and derangement in coming hither. That settled, we can part friends, le Baron. No harm has been done." "What the devil do you mean?" The Baron was on his feet, leaning forward across the table. "Is it possible that I am obscure? My French, perhaps, is not of the purest, but— Oh, your French is fluent enough, too fluent at moments if I may permit myself the observation. Now look you here, le filibustier, I am not a man with whom it is safe to play the fool, as you may very soon discover. You have accepted service of the King of France. You and your men. You hold the rank and draw the pay of a capitaine de vaisseau, and these your officers hold the rank of lieutenants. These ranks carry obligations which you would do well to study, and penalties for failing to discharge them which you might study at the same time. They are something severe. The first obligation of an officer is obedience. I commend it to your attention. You are not to conceive yourselves, as you appear to be doing, my allies in the enterprises I have in view, but my subordinates. In me you behold a commander to lead you, not a companion or an equal. You understand me, I hope. Oh, be sure that I understand, Captain Blood laughed. He was recovering his normal self amazingly under the inspiring stimulus of conflict. The only thing that marred his enjoyment was the reflection that he had not shaved. I forget nothing, I assure you, my general. I do not forget, for instance, as you appear to be doing, that the articles we signed are the condition of our service, and the articles provide that we receive 1/5 share. Refuse us that and you cancel the articles and you cancel our services with them. From that moment we ceased to have the honor to hold rank in the navies of the King of France. There was more than a murmur of approval from his 3 captains. Rivarol glared at them, checkmated. In effect, M. de Cussy was beginning timidly. In effect, monsieur, this is your doing, the Baron flashed on him, glad to have someone upon whom he could fasten the sharp fangs of his irritation. You should be broke for it. You bring the King's service into disrepute. You force me, His Majesty's representative, into an impossible position. Is it impossible to award us the 1/5 share? Quoth Captain Blood silkily. In that case there is no need for beat or for injuries to M. de Cussy. De Cussy knows that we would not have come for less. We depart again upon your assurance that you cannot award us more. And things are as they would have been if M. de Cussy had adhered rigidly to his instructions. I have proved, I hope, to your satisfaction, M. le Baron, that if you repudiate the articles you can neither claim our services nor hinder our departure, not in honor. Not in honor, sir? To the devil with your insolence. Do you imply that any course that were not in honor would be possible to me? I do not imply it because it would not be possible, said Captain Blood. We should see to that. It is, my general, for you to say whether the articles are repudiated. The Baron sat down. I will consider the matter, he said sullenly. You shall be advised of my resolve. Captain Blood rose, his officers rose with him. Captain Blood bowed. Le Baron, said he. Then he and his buccaneers removed themselves from the august and irate presence of the general of the King's armies by land and sea in America. You conceive that there followed for M. de Cussy an extremely bad quarter of an hour. De Cussy, in fact, deserves your sympathy. His self-sufficiency was blown from him by the haughty M. de Rivarol, as down from a thistle by the winds of autumn. The general of the King's armies abused him, this man who was governor of Hispaniola, as if he were a lackey. De Cussy defended himself by urging the thing that Captain Blood had so admirably urged already on his behalf, that if the terms he had made with the buccaneers were not confirmed there was no harm done. De Rivarol bullied and browbeat him into silence. Having exhausted abuse, the Baron proceeded to indignities. Since he accounted that M. de Cussy had proved himself unworthy of the post he held, M. de Rivarol took over the responsibilities of that post for as long as he might remain in Hispaniola, and to give effect to this he began by bringing soldiers from his ships, and setting his own guard in M. de Cussy's castle. Out of this trouble followed quickly. Wolverstone coming ashore next morning in the picturesque garb that he affected, his head swathed in a colored handkerchief, was jeered at by an officer of the newly landed French troops. Not accustomed to derision, Wolverstone replied in kind and with interest. The officer passed to insult, and Wolverstone struck him a blow that felled him, and left him only the half of his poor senses. Within the hour the matter was reported to M. de Rivarol, and before noon, by M. de Rivarol's orders, Wolverstone was under arrest in the castle. The Baron had just sat down to dinner with M. de Cussy when the negro who waited on them announced Captain Blood. Peevishly M. de Rivarol bade him be admitted, and there entered now into his presence a spruce and modish gentleman, dressed with care and sombre richness in black and silver, his swarthy, clear-cut face scrupulously shaven, his long black hair in ringlets that fell to a collar of fine point. In his right hand the gentleman carried a broad black hat with a scarlet ostrich plume, in his left hand an ebony cane. His stockings were of silk, a bunch of ribbons masked his garters, and the black rosettes on his shoes were finely edged with gold. For a moment M. de Rivarol did not recognize him. Blood looked younger by 10 years than yesterday. But the vivid blue eyes under their level black brows were not to be forgotten, and they proclaimed him for the man announced even before he had spoken. His resurrected pride had demanded that he should put himself on an equality with the Baron and advertise that equality by his exterior. "I come inopportunely," he courteously excused himself. "My apologies. My business could not wait. It concerns M. de Cussy, Captain Wolverstone of the Lachesis, whom you have placed under arrest." "It was I who placed him under arrest," said M. de Rivarol. "Indeed. But I thought that M. de Cussy was governor of Hispaniola. Whilst I am here, monsieur, I am the supreme authority. It is as well that you should understand it." "Perfectly. But it is not possible that you are aware of the mistake that has been made." "Mistake, do you say?" "I say mistake. On the whole, it is polite of me to use that word. Also it is expedient. It will save discussions. Your people have arrested the wrong man, M. de Rivarol. Instead of the French officer who used the grossest provocation, they have arrested Captain Wolverstone. It is a matter which I beg you to reverse without delay." M. de Rivarol's hawk face flamed scarlet. His dark eyes bulged. "Sir, you are insolent. But of an insolence that is intolerable." Normally a man of the utmost self-possession, he was so rudely shaken now that he actually stammered. "Le Baron, you waste words. This is the new world. It is not merely new, it is novel to one reared amid the superstitions of the old. That novelty you have not yet had time perhaps to realize, therefore I overlook the offensive epithet you have used. But justice is justice in the new world as in the old, and injustice as intolerable here as there. Now justice demands the enlargement of my officer and the arrest and punishment of yours. That justice I invite you with submission to administer." "With submission?" snorted the Baron in furious scorn. "With the utmost submission, monsieur. But at the same time I will remind M. le Baron that my buccaneers number 800, your troops 500, and M. de Cussy will inform you of the interesting fact that any one buccaneer is equal in action to at least 3 soldiers of the line. I am perfectly frank with you, monsieur, to save time and hard words. Either Captain Wolverstone is instantly set at liberty, or we must take measures to set him at liberty ourselves. The consequences may be appalling. But it is as you please, M. le Baron. You are the supreme authority. It is for you to say." De Rivarol was white to the lips. In all his life he had never been so bearded and defied. But he controlled himself. "You will do me the favor to wait in the anteroom, le Capitaine. I desire a word with M. de Cussy. You shall presently be informed of my decision." When the door had closed, the Baron loosed his fury upon the head of M. de Cussy. "So, these are the men you have enlisted in the king's service, the men who are to serve under me, men who do not serve but dictate, and this before the enterprise that has brought me from France is even under way. What explanations do you offer me, M. de Cussy? I warn you that I am not pleased with you. I am, in fact, as you may perceive, exceedingly angry." The governor seemed to shed his chubbiness. He drew himself stiffly erect. "Your rank, monsieur, does not give you the right to rebuke me, nor do the facts. I have enlisted for you the men that you desired me to enlist. It is not my fault if you do not know how to handle them better. As Captain Blood has told you, this is the new world. So, M. de Rivarol smiled malignantly. "Not only do you offer no explanation, but you venture to put me in the wrong. Almost I admire your temerity. But there," he waved the matter aside. He was supremely sardonic. "It is, you tell me, the new world, and new world's new manners, I suppose. In time I may conform my ideas to this new world, or I may conform this new world to my ideas." He was menacing on that. "For the moment I must accept what I find. It remains for you, monsieur, who have experience of these savage byways, to advise me out of that experience how to act." "Le Baron, it was a folly to have arrested the buccaneer captain. It would be madness to persist. We have not the forces to meet force. In that case, monsieur, perhaps you will tell me what we are to do with regard to the future. Am I to submit at every turn to the dictates of this man Blood? Is the enterprise upon which we are embarked to be conducted as he decrees? Am I, in short, the king's representative in America, to be at the mercy of these rascals? Oh, by no means. I am enrolling volunteers here in Hispaniola, and I am raising a corps of Negroes. I compute that when this is done we shall have a force of 1,000 men, the buccaneers apart. But in that case, why not dispense with them? Because they will always remain the sharp edge of any weapon that we forge. In the class of warfare that lies before us, they are so skilled that what Captain Blood has just said is not an overstatement. A buccaneer is equal to 3 soldiers of the line. At the same time, we shall have a sufficient force to keep them in control. For the rest, monsieur, they have certain notions of honor. They will stand by their articles, and so that we deal justly with them, they will deal justly with us and give no trouble. I have experience of them, and I pledge you my word for that. De Rivarol condescended to be mollified. It was necessary that he should save his face, and in a degree the governor afforded him the means to do so, as well as a certain guarantee for the future in the further force he was raising. Very well, he said. Be so good as to recall this Captain Blood. The captain came in, assured and very dignified. De Rivarol found him detestable, but dissembled it. Le Capitaine, I have taken counsel with le Gouverneur. From what he tells me, it is possible that a mistake has been committed. Justice, you may be sure, shall be done. To ensure it, I shall myself preside over a council to be composed of 2 of my senior officers, yourself and an officer of yours. This council shall hold at once an impartial investigation into the affair, and the offender, the man guilty of having given provocation, shall be punished. Captain Blood bowed. It was not his wish to be extreme. Perfectly, le Baron. And now, sir, you have had the night for reflection in this matter of the articles. Am I to understand that you confirm or that you repudiate them? De Rivarol's eyes narrowed. His mind was full of what M. de Cussy had said, that these buccaneers must prove the sharp edge of any weapon he might forge. He could not dispense with them. He perceived that he had blundered tactically in attempting to reduce the agreed share. Withdrawal from a position of that kind is ever fraught with loss of dignity. But there were those volunteers that M. de Cussy was enrolling to strengthen the hand of the king's general. Their presence might admit anon of the reopening of this question. Meanwhile he must retire in the best order possible. I have considered that too, he announced. And whilst my opinion remains unaltered, I must confess that since M. de Cussy has pledged us, it is for us to fulfill the pledges. The articles are confirmed, sir. Captain Blood bowed again. In vain M. de Rivarol looked searchingly for the least trace of a smile of triumph on those firm lips. The buccaneer's face remained of the utmost gravity. Wolverstone was set at liberty that afternoon, and his assailant sentenced to 2 months' detention. Thus harmony was restored. But it had been an unpromising beginning, and there was more to follow shortly of a similar discordant kind. Blood and his officers were summoned a week later to a council which sat to determine their operations against Spain. De Rivarol laid before them a project for a raid upon the wealthy Spanish town of Cartagena. Captain Blood professed astonishment. Sourly invited by M. de Rivarol to state his grounds for it, he did so with the utmost frankness. Were I general of the king's armies in America, said he, I should have no doubt or hesitation as to the best way in which to serve my royal master and the French nation. That which I think will be obvious to M. de Cussy as it is to me, is that we should at once invade Spanish Hispaniola and reduce the whole of this fruitful and splendid island into the possession of the King of France. That may follow, said M. de Rivarol. It is my wish that we begin with Cartagena. You mean, sir, that we are to sail across the Caribbean on an adventurous expedition, neglecting that which lies here at our very door. In our absence, a Spanish invasion of French Hispaniola is possible. If we begin by reducing the Spaniards here, that possibility will be removed. We shall have added to the crown of France the most coveted possession in the West Indies. The enterprise offers no particular difficulty. It may be speedily accomplished, and once accomplished, it would be time to look farther afield. That would seem the logical order in which this campaign should proceed. He ceased and there was silence. De Rivarol sat back in his chair, the feathered end of a quill between his teeth. Presently he cleared his throat and asked a question. Is there anybody else who shares Captain Blood's opinion? None answered him. His own officers were overawed by him. Blood's followers naturally preferred Cartagena, because offering the greater chance of loot. Loyalty to their leader kept them silent. You seem to be alone in your opinion, said the Baron with his vinegary smile. Captain Blood laughed outright. He had suddenly read the Baron's mind. His airs and graces and haughtiness had so imposed upon Blood that it was only now that at last he saw through them, into the fellow's peddling spirit. Therefore he laughed. There was really nothing else to do. But his laughter was charged with more anger even than contempt. He had been deluding himself that he had done with piracy. The conviction that this French service was free of any taint of that was the only consideration that had induced him to accept it. Yet here was this haughty, supercilious gentleman, who dubbed himself General of the Armies of France, proposing a plundering, thieving raid which, when stripped of its mean, transparent mask of legitimate warfare, was revealed as piracy of the most flagrant. De Rivarol, intrigued by his mirth, scowled upon him disapprovingly. "Why do you laugh, monsieur?" "Because I discover here an irony that is supremely droll. You, le Baron, General of the King's armies by land and sea in America, propose an enterprise of a purely buccaneering character, whilst I, the buccaneer, am urging one that is more concerned with upholding the honor of France. You perceive how droll it is." De Rivarol perceived nothing of the kind. De Rivarol in fact was extremely angry. He bounded to his feet, and every man in the room rose with him, save only M. de Cussy, who sat on with a grim smile on his lips. He too now read the Baron like an open book, and reading him despised him. "Le filibustier," cried Rivarol in a thick voice, "it seems that I must again remind you that I am your superior officer." "My superior officer? Lord of the world. Why, you are just a common pirate. But you shall hear the truth for once, and that before all these gentlemen who have the honor to serve the King of France. It is for me, a buccaneer, a sea robber, to stand here and tell you what is in the interest of French honor and the French crown. Whilst you, the French King's appointed general, neglecting this, are for spending the King's resources against an outlying settlement of no account, shedding French blood and seizing a place that cannot be held, only because it has been reported to you that there is much gold in Cartagena, and that the plunder of it will enrich you. It is worthy of the huckster who sought to haggle with us about our share, and to beat us down after the articles pledging you were already signed. If I am wrong, let him, de Cussy, say so. If I am wrong, let me be proven wrong, and I will beg your pardon. Meanwhile, monsieur, I withdraw from this council. I will have no further part in your deliberations. I accepted the service of the King of France with intent to honor that service. I cannot honor that service by lending countenance to a waste of life and resources in raids upon unimportant settlements, with plunder for their only object. The responsibility for such decisions must rest with you, and with you alone. I desire M. de Cussy to report me to the ministers of France. For the rest, monsieur, it merely remains for you to give me your orders. I await them aboard my ship, and anything else of a personal nature, that you may feel I have provoked by the terms I have felt compelled to use in this council. Le Baron, I have the honor to wish you good day." He stalked out, and his 3 captains, although they thought him mad, rolled after him in loyal silence. De Rivarol was gasping like a landed fish. The stark truth had robbed him of speech. When he recovered, it was to thank heaven vigorously that the council was relieved by Captain Blood's own act of that gentleman's further participation in its deliberations. Inwardly M. de Rivarol burned with shame and rage. The mask had been plucked from him, and he had been held up to scorn. He, the general of the King's armies by sea and land in America. Nevertheless, it was to Cartagena that they sailed in the middle of March. Volunteers and Negroes had brought up the forces directly under M. de Rivarol to 1,200 men. With these he thought he could keep the buccaneer contingent in order and submissive. They made up an imposing fleet, led by M. de Rivarol's flagship, the Victorieuse, a mighty vessel of 80 guns. Each of the 4 other French ships was at least as powerful as Blood's Arabella, which was of 40 guns. Followed the lesser buccaneer vessels, the Elizabeth, Lachesis, and Atropos, and a dozen frigates laden with stores, besides canoes and small craft in tow. Narrowly they missed the Jamaica fleet with Colonel Bishop, which sailed north for Tortuga 2 days after the Baron de Rivarol's southward passage. Chapter 27. Cartagena. Having crossed the Caribbean in the teeth of contrary winds, it was not until the early days of April that the French fleet hove in sight of Cartagena, and M. de Rivarol summoned a council aboard his flagship to determine the method of assault. "It is of importance, messers," he told them, "that we take the city by surprise, not only before it can put itself into a state of defense, but before it can remove its treasures inland. I propose to land a force sufficient to achieve this to the north of the city tonight after dark." And he explained in detail the scheme upon which his wits had labored. He was heard respectfully and approvingly by his officers, scornfully by Captain Blood, and indifferently by the other buccaneer captains present. For it must be understood that Blood's refusal to attend councils had related only to those concerned with determining the nature of the enterprise to be undertaken. Captain Blood was the only one amongst them who knew exactly what lay ahead. 2 years ago he had himself considered a raid upon the place, and he had actually made a survey of it in circumstances which he was presently to disclose. The Baron's proposal was one to be expected from a commander whose knowledge of Cartagena was only such as might be derived from maps. Geographically and strategically considered, it is a curious place. It stands almost foursquare, screened east and north by hills, and it may be said to face south upon the inner of two harbors by which it is normally approached. The entrance to the outer harbor, which is in reality a lagoon some 3 miles across, lies through a neck known as the Boca Chica, or Little Mouth, and defended by a fort. A long strip of densely wooded land to westward acts here as a natural breakwater, and as the inner harbor is approached, another strip of land thrusts across at right angles from the first, towards the mainland on the east. Just short of this it ceases, leaving a deep but very narrow channel, a veritable gateway into the secure and sheltered inner harbor. Another fort defends this second passage. East and north of Cartagena lies the mainland, which may be left out of account. But to the west and northwest this city, so well guarded on every other side, lies directly open to the sea. It stands back beyond a half-mile of beach, and besides this and the stout walls which fortify it, would appear to have no other defenses. But those appearances are deceptive, and they had utterly deceived M. de Rivarol when he devised his plan. It remained for Captain Blood to explain the difficulties when M. de Rivarol informed him that the honor of opening the assault in the manner which he prescribed was to be accorded to the buccaneers. Captain Blood smiled sardonic appreciation of the honor reserved for his men. It was precisely what he would have expected. For the buccaneers the dangers, for M. de Rivarol the honor, glory and profit of the enterprise. "It is an honor which I must decline," said he quite coldly. Wolverstone grunted approval and Hagthorpe nodded. Iberville, who as much as any of them resented the superciliousness of his noble compatriot, never wavered in loyalty to Captain Blood. The French officers, there were 6 of them present, stared their haughty surprise at the buccaneer leader, whilst the Baron challengingly fired a question at him. "How? You decline it, sir? You decline to obey orders, do you say? I understood, le Baron, that you summoned us to deliberate upon the means to be adopted. Then you understood amiss, le Capitaine. You are here to receive my commands. I have already deliberated and I have decided. I hope you understand." "Oh, I understand," laughed Blood. "But I ask myself, do you?" And without giving the Baron time to set the angry question that was bubbling to his lips, he swept on, "You have deliberated, you say, and you have decided. But unless your decision rests upon a wish to destroy my buccaneers, you will alter it when I tell you something of which I have knowledge. This city of Cartagena looks very vulnerable on the northern side, all open to the sea as it apparently stands. Ask yourself, le Baron, how came the Spaniards who built it where it is to have been at such trouble to fortify it to the south, if from the north it is so easily assailable?" That gave M. de Rivarol pause. "The Spaniards," Blood pursued, "are not quite the fools you are supposing them. Let me tell you, messers, that 2 years ago I made a survey of Cartagena as a preliminary to raiding it. I came hither with some friendly trading Indians, myself disguised as an Indian, and in that guise I spent a week in the city and studied carefully all its approaches. On the side of the sea where it looks so temptingly open to assault, there is shoal water for over half a mile out, far enough out, I assure you, to ensure that no ship shall come within bombarding range of it. It is not safe to venture nearer land than 3/4 of a mile. But our landing will be effected in canoes and piraguas and open boats," cried an officer impatiently. "In the calmest season of the year, the surf will hinder any such operation. And you will also bear in mind that if landing were possible as you are suggesting, that landing could not be covered by the ship's guns. In fact, it is the landing parties would be in danger from their own artillery. If the attack is made by night as I propose, covering will be unnecessary. You should be ashore in force before the Spaniards are aware of the intent. You are assuming that Cartagena is a city of the blind, that at this very moment they are not conning our sails and asking themselves who we are and what we intend. But if they feel themselves secure from the north as you suggest," cried the Baron impatiently, "that very security will lull them. Perhaps. But then they're secure. Any attempt to land on this side is doomed to failure at the hands of nature." "Nevertheless, we make the attempt," said the obstinate Baron, whose haughtiness would not allow him to yield before his officers. "If you still choose to do so after what I have said, you are, of course, the person to decide. But I do not lead my men into fruitless danger. If I command you," the Baron was beginning, but Blood unceremoniously interrupted him. Le Baron, when M. de Cussy engaged us on your behalf, it was as much on account of our knowledge and experience of this class of warfare as on account of our strength. I have placed my own knowledge and experience in this particular matter at your disposal. I will add that I abandoned my own project of raiding Cartagena, not being in sufficient strength at the time to force the entrance of the harbor, which is the only way into the city. The strength which you now command is ample for that purpose. But whilst we are doing that, the Spaniards will have time to remove great part of the wealth the city holds. We must take them by surprise. Captain Blood shrugged. If this is a mere pirating raid, that, of course, is a prime consideration. Was with me. But if you are concerned to abate the pride of Spain and plant the lilies of France on the forts of this settlement, the loss of some treasure should not really weigh for much. De Rivarol bit his lip in chagrin. His gloomy eye smoldered as it considered the self-contained buccaneer. But if I command you to go, to make the attempt? He asked. Answer me, monsieur. Let us know once for all where we stand, and who commands this expedition. Positively, I find you tiresome, said Captain Blood, and he swung to M. de Cussy, who sat there gnawing his lip, intensely uncomfortable. I appeal to you, monsieur, to justify me to the general. De Cussy started out of his gloomy abstraction. He cleared his throat. He was extremely nervous. In view of what Captain Blood has submitted. Oh, to the devil with that, snapped Rivarol. It seems that I am followed by poltroons. Look you, le capitaine, since you are afraid to undertake this thing, I will myself undertake it. The weather is calm and I count upon making good my landing. If I do so, I shall have proved you wrong, and I shall have a word to say to you tomorrow which you may not like. I am being very generous with you, sir. He waved his hand regally. You have leave to go. It was sheer obstinacy and empty pride that drove him, and he received the lesson he deserved. The fleet stood in during the afternoon to within a mile of the coast, and under cover of darkness 300 men, of whom 200 were Negroes, the whole of the Negro contingent having been pressed into the undertaking, were pulled away for the shore in the canoes, piraguas, and ships' boats. Rivarol's pride compelled him, however much he may have disliked the venture, to lead them in person. The first 6 boats were caught in the surf, and pounded into fragments before their occupants could extricate themselves. The thunder of the breakers and the cries of the shipwrecked warned those who followed, and thereby saved them from sharing the same fate. By the Baron's urgent orders they pulled away again out of danger, and stood about to pick up such survivors as contrived to battle towards them. Close upon 50 lives were lost in the adventure, together with half a dozen boats stored with ammunition and light guns. The Baron went back to his flagship an infuriated, but by no means a wiser man. Wisdom, not even the pungent wisdom experience thrusts upon us, is not for such as M. de Rivarol. His anger embraced all things, but focused chiefly upon Captain Blood. In some warped process of reasoning he held the buccaneer chiefly responsible for this misadventure. He went to bed considering furiously what he should say to Captain Blood upon the morrow. He was awakened at dawn by the rolling thunder of guns. Emerging upon the poop in nightcap and slippers, he beheld a sight that increased his unreasonable and unreasoning fury. The 4 buccaneer ships under canvas were going through extraordinary maneuver half a mile off the Boca Chica and little more than half a mile away from the remainder of the fleet, and from their flanks flame and smoke were belching each time they swung broadside to the great round fort that guarded that narrow entrance. The fort was returning the fire vigorously and viciously. But the buccaneers timed their broadsides with extraordinary judgment to catch the defending ordnance reloading. Then as they drew the Spaniards' fire, they swung away again, not only taking care to be ever-moving targets, but further to present no more than bow or stern to the fort, their masts in line, when the heaviest cannonades were to be expected. Gibbering and cursing, M. de Rivarol stood there and watched this action, so presumptuously undertaken by Blood on his own responsibility. The officers of the victors crowded round him, but it was not until M. de Cussy came to join the group that he opened the sluices of his rage. And M. de Cussy himself invited the deluge that now caught him. He had come up rubbing his hands and taking a proper satisfaction in the energy of the men whom he had enlisted. A de Rivarol, he laughed. He understands his business, this Captain Blood. He'll plant the lilies of France on that fort before breakfast. The Baron swung upon him snarling. He understands his business, eh? His business, let me tell you, M. de Cussy, is to obey my orders, and I have not ordered this. Par l'amour Dieu. When this is over I'll deal with him for his damned insubordination. Surely, le Baron, he will have justified it if he succeeds. Justified it? Parbleu. Can a soldier ever justify acting without orders? He raved on furiously, his officers supporting him out of their detestation of Captain Blood. Meanwhile the fight went merrily on. The fort was suffering badly. Yet for all their maneuvering the buccaneers were not escaping punishment. The starboard gunwale of the Atropos had been hammered into splinters, and a shot had caught her astern in the coach. The Elizabeth was badly battered about the forecastle, and the Arabella's maintop had been shot away, whilst, towards the end of that engagement, the Lachesis came reeling out of the fight with a shattered rudder, steering herself by sweeps. The absurd baron's fierce eyes positively gleamed with satisfaction. "I pray heaven they may sink all his infernal ships," he cried in his frenzy. But heaven didn't hear him. Scarcely had he spoken than there was a terrific explosion, and half the fort went up in fragments. A lucky shot from the buccaneers had found the powder magazine. It may have been a couple of hours later, when Captain Blood, as spruce and cool as if he had just come from a levee, stepped upon the quarter-deck of the Victorience, to confront M. de Rivarol, still in bedgown and nightcap. "I have to report, le Baron, that we are in possession of the fort on Boca Chica. The standard of France is flying from what remains of its tower, and the way into the outer harbor is open to your fleet." De Rivarol was compelled to swallow his fury, though it choked him. The jubilation among his officers had been such that he could not continue as he had begun. Yet his eyes were malevolent, his face pale with anger. "You are fortunate, Blood, that you succeeded," he said. "It would have gone very ill with you had you failed. Another time be so good as to await my orders, lest you should afterwards lack the justification which your good fortune has procured you this morning." Blood smiled with a flash of white teeth and bowed. "I shall be glad of your orders now, General, for pursuing our advantage. You realize that speed in striking is the first essential." Rivarol was left gaping a moment. Absorbed in his ridiculous anger, he had considered nothing. But he made a quick recovery. "To my cabin, if you please," he commanded peremptorily, and was turning to lead the way when Blood arrested him. "With submission, my general, we shall be better here. You behold there the scene of our coming action. It is spread before you like a map." He waved his hand towards the lagoon, the country flanking it and the considerable city standing back from the beach. "If it is not a presumption in me to offer a suggestion." He paused. De Rivarol looked at him sharply, suspecting irony. But the swarthy face was bland, the keen eyes steady. "Let us hear your suggestion," he consented. Blood pointed out the fort at the mouth of the inner harbor, which was just barely visible above the waving palms on the intervening tongue of land. He announced that its armament was less formidable than that of the outer fort, which they had reduced. But on the other hand, the passage was very much narrower than the Boca Chica, and before they could attempt to make it in any case, they must dispose of those defenses. He proposed that the French ships should enter the outer harbor, and proceed at once to bombardment. Meanwhile, he would land 300 buccaneers and some artillery on the eastern side of the lagoon, beyond the fragrant garden islands dense with richly bearing fruit trees, and proceed simultaneously to storm the fort in the rear. Thus beset on both sides at once, and demoralized by the fate of the much stronger outer fort, he did not think the Spaniards would offer a very long resistance. Then it would be for M. de Rivarol to garrison the fort, whilst Captain Blood would sweep on with his men, and seize the church of Nuestra Senora de la Pupa, plainly visible on its hill immediately eastward of the town. Not only did that eminence afford them a valuable and obvious strategic advantage, but it commanded the only road that led from Cartagena to the interior, and once it were held there would be no further question of the Spaniards attempting to remove the wealth of the city. That to M. de Rivarol was, as Captain Blood had judged that it would be, the crowning argument. Supercilious until that moment, and disposed for his own pride's sake to treat the buccaneer's suggestions with cavalier criticism, M. de Rivarol's manner suddenly changed. He became alert and brisk, went so far as tolerantly to commend Captain Blood's plan, and issued orders that action might be taken upon it at once. It is not necessary to follow that action step by step. Blunders on the part of the French marred its smooth execution, and the indifferent handling of their ships led to the sinking of 2 of them in the course of the afternoon by the fort's gunfire. But by evening, owing largely to the irresistible fury with which the buccaneers stormed the place from the landward side, the fort had surrendered, and before dusk Blood and his men with some ordnance hauled thither by mules dominated the city from the heights of Nuestra Senora de la Pupa. At noon on the morrow, shorn of defenses and threatened with bombardment, Cartagena sent offers of surrender to M. de Rivarol. Swollen with pride by a victory for which he took the entire credit to himself, the Baron dictated his terms. He demanded that all public effects and office accounts be delivered up, that the merchants surrender all moneys and goods held by them for their correspondence. The inhabitants could choose whether they would remain in the city or depart, but those who went must first deliver up all their property, and those who elected to remain must surrender half, and become the subjects of France. Religious houses and churches should be spared, but they must render accounts of all monies and valuables in their possession. Cartagena agreed, having no choice in the matter, and on the next day, which was the 5th of April, M. de Rivarol entered the city and proclaimed it now a French colony, appointing M. de Cussy its governor. Thereafter he proceeded to the cathedral, where very properly a Te Deum was sung in honor of the conquest. This by way of grace, whereafter M. de Rivarol proceeded to devour the city. The only detail in which the French conquest of Cartagena differed from an ordinary buccaneering raid was that under the severest penalties no soldier was to enter the house of any inhabitant. But this apparent respect for the persons and property of the conquered was based in reality upon M. de Rivarol's anxiety lest a doubloon should be abstracted from all the wealth that was pouring into the treasury opened by the Baron in the name of the King of France. Once the golden stream had ceased, he removed all restrictions and left the city in prey to his men, who proceeded further to pillage it of that part of their property which the inhabitants who became French subjects had been assured should remain inviolate. The plunder was enormous. In the course of 4 days over 100 mules laden with gold went out of the city and down to the boats waiting at the beach to convey the treasure aboard the ships. Chapter 28. The Honor of M. de Rivarol. During the capitulation and for some time after, Captain Blood and the greater portion of his buccaneers had been at their post on the heights of Nuestra Senora de la Popa, utterly in ignorance of what was taking place. Blood, although the man chiefly, if not solely, responsible for the swift reduction of the city, which was proving a veritable treasure-house, was not even shown the consideration of being called to the council of officers which with M. de Rivarol determined the terms of the capitulation. This was a slight that at another time Captain Blood would not have borne for a moment. But at present, in his odd frame of mind, and its divorcement from piracy, he was content to smile his utter contempt of the French general. Not so, however, his captains and still less his men. Resentment smoldered amongst them for a while, to flame out violently at the end of that week in Cartagena. It was only by undertaking to voice their grievance to the Baron that their captain was able for the moment to pacify them. That done, he went at once in quest of M. de Rivarol. He found him in the offices which the Baron had set up in the town, with a staff of clerks to register the treasure brought in and to cast up the surrendered account books, with a view to ascertaining precisely what were the sums yet to be delivered up. The Baron sat there scrutinizing ledgers like a city merchant, and checking figures to make sure that all was correct to the last peso. A choice occupation this for the general of the king's armies by sea and land. He looked up irritated by the interruption which Captain Blood's advent occasioned. "Hello, Baron," the latter greeted him. "I must speak frankly, and you must suffer it. My men are on the point of mutiny." De Rivarol considered him with a faint lift of the eyebrows. "Captain Blood, I too will speak frankly, and you too must suffer it. If there is a mutiny, you and your captains shall be held personally responsible. The mistake you make is in assuming with me the tone of an ally, whereas I have given you clearly to understand from the first that you are simply in the position of having accepted service under me. Your proper apprehension of that fact will save the waste of a deal of words." Blood contained himself with difficulty. One of these fine days he felt that for the sake of humanity he must slit the comb of this supercilious, arrogant cockerel. "You may define our positions as you please," said he, "but I'll remind you that the nature of a thing is not changed by the name you give it. I am concerned with facts, chiefly with the fact that we entered into definite articles with you. Those articles provide for a certain distribution of the spoil. My men demand it. They are not satisfied." "Of what are they not satisfied?" demanded the Baron. "Of your honesty, M. de Rivarol." A blow in the face could scarcely have taken the Frenchman more aback. He stiffened and drew himself up, his eyes blazing, his face of a deathly pallor. The clerks at the tables laid down their pens, and awaited the explosion in a sort of terror. For a long moment there was silence. Then the great gentleman delivered himself in a voice of concentrated anger. "Do you really dare so much, you and the dirty thieves that follow you? God's blood! You shall answer to me for that word, though it entail a yet worse dishonor to meet you. Faugh! I will remind you," said Blood, "that I am speaking not for myself but for my men. It is they who are not satisfied, they who threaten that unless satisfaction is afforded them and promptly, they will take it." "Take it?" said Rivarol, trembling in his rage. "Let them attempt it and—" "Now don't be rash. My men are within their rights, as you are aware. They demand to know when this sharing of the spoil is to take place, and when they are to receive the fifth for which their articles provide. God give me patience. How can we share the spoil before it has been completely gathered? My men have reason to believe that it is gathered, and anyway, they view with mistrust that it should all be housed aboard your ships, and remain in your possession. They say that hereafter there will be no ascertaining what the spoil really amounts to. But, name of heaven, I have kept books. They are there for all to see. They do not wish to see account books. Few of them can read. They want to view the treasure itself. They know, you compel me to be blunt, that the accounts have been falsified. Your books show the spoil of Cartagena to amount to some 10 million livres. The men know, and they are very skilled in these computations, that it exceeds the enormous total of 40 millions. They insist that the treasure itself be produced and weighed in their presence, as is the custom among the brethren of the coast. I know nothing of filibuster customs. The gentleman was disdainful. But you are learning quickly. What do you mean, you rogue? I am a leader of armies, not of plundering thieves. Oh, but of course. Blood's irony laughed in his eyes. Yet, whatever you may be, I warn you that unless you yield to a demand that I consider just and therefore uphold, you may look for trouble, and it would not surprise me if you never leave Cartagena at all, nor convey a single gold piece home to France. Ah, pardieu! Am I to understand that you are threatening me? Come, le Baron. I warn you of the trouble that a little prudence may avert. You do not know on what a volcano you are sitting. You do not know the ways of buccaneers. If you persist, Cartagena will be drenched in blood, and whatever the outcome, the King of France will not have been well served. That shifted the basis of the argument to less hostile ground. A while yet it continued, to be concluded at last by an ungracious undertaking from M. de Rivarol to submit to the demands of the buccaneers. He gave it with an extreme ill-grace, and only because blood made him realize at last that to withhold it longer would be dangerous. In an engagement he might conceivably defeat Blood's followers. But conceivably he might not. And even if he succeeded, the effort would be so costly to him in men that he might not thereafter find himself in sufficient strength to maintain his hold of what he had seized. The end of it all was that he gave a promise at once to make the necessary preparations, and if Captain Blood and his officers would wait upon him on board the Victorieuse tomorrow morning, the treasure should be produced, weighed in their presence, and their fifth share surrendered there and then into their own keeping. Among the buccaneers that night there was hilarity over the sudden abatement of M. de Rivarol's monstrous pride. But when the next dawn broke over Cartagena, they had the explanation of it. The only ships to be seen in the harbor were the Arabella and the Elizabeth riding at anchor, and the Atropos and the Lachesis careened on the beach for repair of the damage sustained in the bombardment. The French ships were gone. They had been quietly and secretly warped out of the harbor under cover of night, and 3 sails, faint and small, on the horizon to westward was all that remained to be seen of them. The absconding M. de Rivarol had gone off with the treasure, taking with him the troops and mariners he had brought from France. He had left behind him at Cartagena not only the empty-handed buccaneers whom he had swindled, but also M. de Cussy and the volunteers and Negroes from Hispaniola, whom he had swindled no less. The two parties were fused into one by their common fury, and before the exhibition of it the inhabitants of that ill-fated town were stricken with deeper terror than they had yet known since the coming of this expedition. Captain Blood alone kept his head, setting a curb upon his deep chagrin. He had promised himself that before parting from M. de Rivarol he would present a reckoning for all the petty affronts and insults to which that unspeakable fellow, now proved a scoundrel, had subjected him. "We must follow," he declared. "Follow and punish." At first that was the general cry. Then came the consideration that only 2 of the buccaneer ships were seaworthy, and these could not accommodate the whole force, particularly being at the moment indifferently victualled for a long voyage. The crews of the Lachesis and Atropos and with them their captains, Wolverstone and Iberville, renounced the intention. After all, there would be a deal of treasure still hidden in Cartagena. They would remain behind to extort it whilst fitting their ships for sea. Let Blood and Hagthorpe and those who sailed with them do as they pleased. Then only did Blood realize the rashness of his proposal, and in attempting to draw back he almost precipitated a battle between the two parties into which that same proposal had now divided the buccaneers. And meanwhile those French sails on the horizon were growing less and less. Blood was reduced to despair. If he went off now, heaven knew what would happen to the town, the temper of those whom he was leaving being what it was. Yet if he remained, it would simply mean that his own and Hagthorpe's crews would join in the Saturnalia and increase the hideousness of events now inevitable. Unable to reach a decision, his own men and Hagthorpe's took the matter off his hands, eager to give chase to Rivarol. Not only was a dastardly cheat to be punished but an enormous treasure to be won by treating as an enemy this French commander who, himself, had so villainously broken the alliance. When Blood, torn as he was between conflicting considerations, still hesitated, they bore him almost by main force aboard the Arabella. Within an hour, the water casks at least replenished and stowed aboard, the Arabella and the Elizabeth put to sea upon that angry chase. When we were well at sea and the Arabella's course was laid, writes Pitt in his log, I went to seek the captain, knowing him to be in great trouble of mind over these events. I found him sitting alone in his cabin, his head in his hands, torment in the eyes that stared straight before him, seeing nothing. What now, Peter? Cried the young Somerset mariner. Lord man, what is there here to fret you? Surely, 'tisn't the thought of Rivarol. No, said Blood thickly, and for once he was communicative. It may well be that he must vent the thing that oppressed him or be driven mad by it. And Pitt, after all, was his friend and loved him, and so, a proper man for confidences. But if she knew, oh God, I had thought to have done with piracy, thought to have done with it forever. Yet here have I been committed by this scoundrel to the worst piracy that ever I was guilty of. Think of Cartagena. Think of the hell those devils will be making of it now. And I must have that on my soul. Nay, Peter, 'tisn't on your soul, but on Rivarol's. It is that dirty thief who has brought all this about. What could you have done to prevent it? I would have stayed if it could have availed. It could not, and you know it. So why repine? There is more than that to it, groaned Blood. What now? What remains? Loyal service with the English was made impossible for me. Loyal service with France has led to this, and that is equally impossible hereafter. What to live clean, I believe the only thing is to go and offer my sword to the King of Spain. But something remained, the last thing that he could have expected. Something towards which they were rapidly sailing over the tropical, sunlit sea. All this against which he now inveighed so bitterly was but a necessary stage in the shaping of his odd destiny. Setting a course for Hispaniola, since they judged that thither must Rivarol go to refit before attempting to cross to France, the Arabella and the Elizabeth plowed briskly northward with a moderately favorable wind for 2 days and nights without ever catching a glimpse of their quarry. The third dawn brought with it a haze which circumscribed their range of vision to something between 2 and 3 miles, and deepened their growing vexation and their apprehension that M. de Rivarol might escape them altogether. Their position then, according to Pitt's log, was approximately 75 degrees, 30 W long by 17 degrees 45 in lat, so that they had Jamaica on their larboard beam some 30 miles to westward, and indeed, away to the northwest, faintly visible as a bank of clouds, appeared the great ridge of the Blue Mountains whose peaks were thrust into the clear upper air above the low-lying haze. The wind, to which they were sailing very close, was westerly, and it bore to their ears a booming sound which in less experienced ears might have passed for the breaking of surf upon a lee shore. Guns, said Pitt, who stood with Blood upon the quarter-deck. Blood nodded, listening. 10 miles away, perhaps 15, somewhere off Port Royal I should judge, Pitt added. Then he looked at his captain. Does it concern us? He asked. Guns off Port Royal? That should argue Colonel Bishop at work. And against whom should he be in action but against friends of ours? I think it may concern us. Anyway, we'll stand in to investigate. Bid them put the helm over. Close-hauled they tacked to weather, guided by the sound of combat, which grew in volume and definition as they approached it. Thus for an hour, perhaps. Then, as, telescope to his eye, Blood raked the haze, expecting at any moment to behold the battling ships, the guns abruptly ceased. They held to their course, nevertheless, with all hands on deck eagerly, anxiously scanning the sea ahead. And presently an object loomed into view, which soon defined itself for a great ship on fire. As the Arabella with the Elizabeth following closely raced nearer on their northwesterly tack, the outlines of the blazing vessel grew clearer. Presently her mast stood out sharp and black above the smoke and flames, and through his telescope Blood made out plainly the pennon of St. George fluttering from her maintop. An English ship, he cried. He scanned the seas for the Conqueror in the battle of which this grim evidence was added to that of the sounds they had heard, and when at last, as they drew closer to the doomed vessel, they made out the shadowy outlines of 3 tall ships, some 3 or 4 miles away, standing in toward Port Royal, the first and natural assumption was that these ships must belong to the Jamaica fleet, and that the burning vessel was a defeated buccaneer, and because of this they sped on to pick up the 3 boats that were standing away from the blazing hulk. But Pitt, who through the telescope was examining the receding squadron, observed things apparent only to the eye of the trained mariner, and made the incredible announcement that the largest of these 3 vessels was Rivarol's Victorious. They took in sail and hove to as they came up with the drifting boats, laden to capacity with survivors. And there were others adrift on some of the spars and wreckage with which the sea was strewn, who must be rescued. Chapter 29. The Service of King William. One of the boats bumped alongside the Arabella, and up the entrance ladder came first a slight, spruce little gentleman in a coat of mulberry satin laced with gold, whose wizened, yellow, rather peevish face was framed in a heavy black periwig. His modish and costly apparel had nowise suffered by the adventure through which he had passed, and he carried himself with the easy assurance of a man of rank. Here quite clearly was no buccaneer. He was closely followed by one who in every particular, save that of age, was his physical opposite, corpulent in a brawny, vigorous way, with a full, round, weather-beaten face whose mouth was humorous and whose eyes were blue and twinkling. He was well dressed without fripperies, and bore with him an air of vigorous authority. As the little man stepped from the ladder into the waist, whither Captain Blood had gone to receive him, his sharp, ferrety dark eyes swept the uncouth ranks of the assembled crew of the Arabella. "And where the devil may I be now?" he demanded irritably. "Are you English, or what the devil are you?" "Myself, I have the honor to be Irish, sir. My name is Blood, Captain Peter Blood, and this is my ship the Arabella, all very much at your service." "Blood!" shrilled the little man. "Us Blood! A pirate!" He swung to the colossus who followed him. "A damned pirate, Vander Quailen. Rend my vitals, but we're come from Scylla to Charybdis." "So?" said the other gutturally, and again, "So?" Then the humor of it took him, and he yielded to it. "Damn! What's to laugh at, you porpoise?" spluttered Mulberry Coat. "A fine tale this'll make it home. Admiral Vander Quailen first loses his fleet in the night, then has his flagship fired under him by a French squadron, and ends all by being captured by a pirate. I'm glad you find it matter for laughter. Since for my sins I happen to be with you, I'm damned if I do." "There's a misapprehension, if I may make so bold as to point it out," put in Blood quietly. "You are not captured, gentlemen, you are rescued. When you realize it, perhaps it will occur to you to acknowledge the hospitality I am offering you. It may be poor, but it is the best at my disposal." The fierce little gentleman stared at him. "Damn! Do you permit yourself to be ironical?" He disapproved him, and possibly with a view to correcting any such tendency, proceeded to introduce himself. "I am Lord Willoughby, King William's Governor-General of the West Indies, and this is Admiral Vander Quailen, Commander of His Majesty's West Indian Fleet, at present mislaid somewhere in this damned Caribbean Sea." "King William?" quoth Blood, and he was conscious that Pitt and Dyke, who were behind him, now came edging nearer, sharing his own wonder. "And who may be King William, and of what may he be king?" "What's that?" In a wonder greater than his own, Lord Willoughby stared back at him. "At last, I am alluding to His Majesty King William III, William of Orange, who, with Queen Mary, has been ruling England for 2 months and more." There was a moment's silence, until Blood realized what he was being told. "D'ye mean, sir, that they've roused themselves at home and kicked out that scoundrel James and his gang of ruffians?" Admiral Vander Quailen nudged his lordship, a humorous twinkle in his blue eyes. "His politics are fairy sound, I dink," he growled. His lordship's smile brought lines like gashes into his leathery cheeks. "Slife! Hadn't you heard? Where the devil have you been at all?" "Out of touch with the world for the last 3 months, said Blood. "Stab me. You must have been. And in that 3 months the world has undergone some changes." Briefly he added an account of them. King James was fled to France and living under the protection of King Louis, wherefore, and for other reasons, England had joined the league against her, and was now at war with France. That was how it happened that the Dutch admiral's flagship had been attacked by M. de Rivarol's fleet that morning, from which it clearly followed that in his voyage from Cartagena, the Frenchman must have spoken some ship that gave him the news. After that, with renewed assurances that aboard his ship they should be honorably entreated, Captain Blood led the Governor-General and the Admiral to his cabin, what time the work of rescue went on. The news he had received had set Blood's mind in a turmoil. If King James was dethroned and banished, there was an end to his own outlawry for his alleged share in an earlier attempt to drive out that tyrant. It became possible for him to return home and take up his life again at the point where it was so unfortunately interrupted 4 years ago. He was dazzled by the prospect so abruptly opened out to him. The thing so filled his mind, moved him so deeply, that he must afford it expression. In doing so, he revealed of himself more than he knew or intended to the astute little gentleman who watched him so keenly the while. "Go home if you will," said his lordship when Blood paused. You may be sure that none will harass you on the score of your piracy, considering what it was that drove you to it. But why be in haste? We have heard of you, to be sure, and we know of what you are capable upon the seas. Here is a great chance for you, since you declare yourself sick of piracy. Should you choose to serve King William out here during this war, your knowledge of the West Indies should render you a very valuable servant to His Majesty's government, which you would not find ungrateful. You should consider it. Damn, sir, I repeat, it is a great chance you are given. That your lordship gives me, Blood amended, I am very grateful. But at the moment, I confess, I can consider nothing but this great news. It alters the shape of the world. I must accustom myself to view it as it now is, before I can determine my own place in it. Pitt came in to report that the work of rescue was at an end, and the men picked up, some 45 in all, safe aboard the 2 buccaneer ships. He asked for orders. Blood rose. I am negligent of your lordship's concerns in my consideration of my own. You'll be wishing me to land you at Port Royal. At Port Royal? The little man squirmed wrathfully on his seat. Wrathfully, and at length he informed Blood that they had put into Port Royal last evening to find its deputy governor absent. He had gone on some wild goose chase to Tortuga after buccaneers, taking the whole of the fleet with him. Blood stared in surprise a moment, then yielded to laughter. He went, I suppose, before news reached him of the change of government at home and the war with France? He did not, snapped Willoughby. He was informed of both, and also of my coming before he set out. Oh, impossible. So I should have thought. But I have the information from a Major Mallard whom I found in Port Royal, apparently governing in this fool's absence. But is he mad to leave his post at such a time? Blood was amazed. Taking the whole fleet with him, pray remember, and leaving the place open to French attack. That is the sort of deputy governor that the late government thought fit to appoint, an epitome of its misrule, damn. He leaves Port Royal unguarded save by a ramshackle fort that can be reduced to rubble in an hour. Stab me. It's unbelievable. The lingering smile faded from Blood's face. Is Rivarol aware of this? He cried sharply. It was the Dutch admiral who answered him. Vould he go dear if he were not? De Rivarol he take some of our men prisoners. Perhaps dey del him. Perhaps he make dem tell. ID is a great opportunity. His lordship snarled like a mountain cat. That rascal bishop shall answer for it with his head if there's any mischief done through this desertion of his post. What if it were deliberate, eh? What if he is more knave than fool? What if this is his way of serving King James, from whom he held his office? Captain Blood was generous. Hardly so much. It was just vindictiveness that urged him. It's myself he's hunting at Tortuga, my lord. But I'm thinking that while he's about it, I'd best be looking after Jamaica for King William. He laughed, with more mirth than he had used in the last 2 months. Set a course for Port Royal, Jeremy, and make all speed. We'll be level yet with M. de Rivarol, and wipe off some other scores at the same time. Both Lord Willoughby and the Admiral were on their feet. But you are not equal to it, damn, cried his lordship. Any one of the Frenchman's 3 ships is a match for both yours, my man. In guns, aye, said Blood, and he smiled. But there's more than guns that matter in these affairs. If your lordship would like to see an action fought at sea as an action should be fought, this is your opportunity. Both stared at him. But the odds? His lordship insisted. ID is impossible, said van der Kuylen, shaking his great head. Seamanship is important. But guns is guns. If I can't defeat him, I can sink my own ships in the channel, and block him in until Bishop gets back from his wild goose chase with his squadron, or until your own fleet turns up. And what good will that be, pray? Demanded Willoughby. I'll be after telling you. Rivarol is a fool to take this chance, considering what he's got aboard. He carried in his hold the treasure plundered from Cartagena, amounting to 40 million livres. They jumped at the mention of that colossal sum. He has gone into Port Royal with it. Whether he defeats me or not, he doesn't come out of Port Royal with it again, and sooner or later that treasure shall find its way into King William's coffers after, say, 1/5 share shall have been paid to my buccaneers. Is that agreed, Lord Willoughby? His lordship stood up and, shaking back the cloud of lace from his wrist, held out a delicate white hand. Captain Blood, I discover greatness in you, said he. Sure it's your lordship has the fine sight to perceive it, laughed the captain. Yes, yes. But how will you do ID? Growled van der Kuylen. Come on deck, and it's a demonstration I'll be giving you before the day's much older. Chapter 30. The Last Fight of the Arabella. Which way do you wait, my friend? Growled van der Kuylen. Aye, in God's name, snapped Willoughby. It was the afternoon of that same day, and the two buccaneer ships rocked gently with idly flapping sails under the lee of the long spit of land forming the great natural harbor of Port Royal, and less than a mile from the straits leading into it, which the fort commanded. It was 2 hours and more since they had brought up thereabouts, having crept thither unobserved by the city and by M. de Rivarol's ships, and all the time the air had been aquiver with the roar of guns from sea and land, announcing that battle was joined between the French and the defenders of Port Royal. That long, inactive waiting was straining the nerves of both Lord Willoughby and van der Kuylen. "You said you would show us some Vindings. Wir are dies Vindings?" Blood faced them, smiling confidently. He was arrayed for battle in back and breast of black steel. "I'll not be trying your patience much longer. Indeed, I notice already a slackening in the fire. But it's this way now, there's nothing at all to be gained by precipitancy, and a deal to be gained by delaying, as I shall show you, I hope." Lord Willoughby eyed him suspiciously. "Ye think that in the meantime Bishop may come back or Admiral van der Kuylen's fleet appear? Sure now I'm thinking nothing of the kind. What I'm thinking is that in this engagement with the Fort M. de Rivarol, who's a lubberly fellow as I've reason to know, will be taking some damage that may make the odds a trifle more even. Sure, it'll be time enough to go forward when the fort has shot its bolt." "Aye, aye." The sharp approval came like a cough from the little Governor-General. "I perceive your object, and I believe ye're entirely right. Ye have the qualities of a great commander, Captain Blood. I beg your pardon for having misunderstood you. And that's very handsome of your lordship. Ye see, I have some experience of this kind of action, and whilst I'll take any risk that I must, I'll take none that I needn't. But—" He broke off to listen. I was right. The fire's slackening. It'll mean the end of Mallard's resistance in the fort. Ho there, Jeremy." He leaned on the carved rail and issued orders crisply. The boatswain's pipe shrilled out, and in a moment the ship that had seemed to slumber there awoke to life. Came the padding of feet along the decks, the creaking of blocks and the hoisting of sail. The helm was put over hard, and in a moment they were moving, the Elizabeth following, ever in obedience to the signals from the Arabella, whilst Ogle the gunner, whom he had summoned, was receiving Blood's final instructions before plunging down to his station on the main deck. Within a quarter of an hour they had rounded the head, and stood into the harbour mouth, within saker shot of Rivarol's 3 ships, to which they now abruptly disclosed themselves. Where the fort had stood they now beheld a smoking rubbish heap, and the victorious Frenchman with the lily standard trailing from his mastheads was sweeping forward to snatch the rich prize whose defences he had shattered. Blood scanned the French ships and chuckled. The Victorieurs and the Medusa appeared to have taken no more than a few scars, but the third ship, the Baleine, listing heavily to larboard so as to keep the great gash in her starboard well above water, was out of account. "You see," he cried to van der Kuylen, and without waiting for the Dutchman's approving grunt, he shouted an order, "Helm hard a port." The sight of that great red ship with her gilt beakhead and open ports swinging broadside on must have given check to Rivarol's soaring exultation. Yet before he could move to give an order, before he could well resolve what order to give, a volcano of fire and metal burst upon him from the buccaneers, and his decks were swept by the murderous scythe of the broadside. The Arabella held to her course, giving place to the Elizabeth, which, following closely, executed the same maneuver. And then while still the Frenchmen were confused, panic-stricken by an attack that took them so utterly by surprise, the Arabella had gone about, and was returning in her tracks, presenting now her larboard guns, and loosing her second broadside in the wake of the first. Came yet another broadside from the Elizabeth, and then the Arabella's trumpeter sent a call across the water, which Hagthorpe perfectly understood. "On now, Jeremy," cried Blood. "Straight into them before they recover their wits. Stand by there. Prepare to board. Ayton, the grapnels. And pass the word to the gunner in the prow to fire as fast as he can load." He discarded his feathered hat, and covered himself with a steel headpiece, which a Negro lad brought him. He meant to lead this boarding party in person. Briskly he explained himself to his 2 guests. "Boarding is our only chance here. We are too heavily outgunned." Of this the fullest demonstration followed quickly. The Frenchmen having recovered their wits at last, both ships swung broadside on, and concentrating upon the Arabella as the nearer and heavier and therefore more immediately dangerous of their 2 opponents, volleyed upon her jointly at almost the same moment. Unlike the buccaneers, who had fired high to cripple their enemies above decks, the French fifed low to smash the hull of their assailant. The Arabella rocked and staggered under that terrific hammering, although Pitt kept her headed towards the French so that she should offer the narrowest target. For a moment she seemed to hesitate, then she plunged forward again, her beakhead in splinters, her forecastle smashed, and a gaping hole forward that was only just above the waterline. Indeed, to make her safe from bilging, Blood ordered a prompt jettisoning of the forward guns, anchors and water casks and whatever else was movable. Meanwhile, the Frenchman going about, gave the like reception to the Elizabeth. The Arabella, indifferently served by the wind, pressed forward to come to grips. But before she could accomplish her object, the Victorieuse had loaded her starboard guns again, and pounded her advancing enemy with a second broadside at close quarters. Amid the thunder of cannon, the rending of timbers, and the screams of maimed men, the half-necked Arabella plunged and reeled into the cloud of smoke that concealed her prey, and then from Hayton went up the cry that she was going down by the head. Blood's heart stood still. And then in that very moment of his despair, the blue and gold flank of the Victorieuse loomed through the smoke. But even as he caught that enheartening glimpse he perceived, too, how sluggish now was their advance, and how with every second it grew more sluggish. They must sink before they reached her. Thus, with an oath opined the Dutch admiral, and from Lord Willoughby there was a word of blame for Blood's seamanship in having risked all upon this gambler's throw of boarding. "There was no other chance," cried Blood in broken-hearted frenzy. "If ye say it was desperate and foolhardy, why so it was, but the occasion and the means demanded nothing less. I fail within an ace of victory." But they had not yet completely failed. Hayton himself, and a score of sturdy rogues whom his whistle had summoned, were crouching for shelter amid the wreckage of the forecastle with grapnels ready. Within 7 or 8 yards of the Victorieuse, when their way seemed spent, and their forward deck already awash under the eyes of the jeering, cheering Frenchmen, those men leapt up and forward, and hurled their grapnels across the chasm. Of the 4 they flung, 2 reached the Frenchmen's decks and fastened there. Swift as thought itself, was then the action of those sturdy, experienced buccaneers. Unhesitatingly all threw themselves upon the chain of one of those grapnels, neglecting the other, and heaved upon it with all their might to warp the ships together. Blood, watching from his own quarter-deck, sent out his voice in a clarion call. "Musketeers to the prow!" The musketeers, at their station at the waist, obeyed him with the speed of men who know that in obedience is the only hope of life. 50 of them dashed forward instantly, and from the ruins of the forecastle they blazed over the heads of Hayton's men, mowing down the French soldiers who, unable to dislodge the irons, firmly held where they had deeply bitten into the timbers of the Victorieuse, were themselves preparing to fire upon the grapnel crew. Starboard to starboard the 2 ships swung against each other with a jarring thud. By then Blood was down in the waist, judging and acting with the hurricane speed the occasion demanded. Sail had been lowered by slashing away the ropes that held the yards. The advance guard of boarders, 100 strong, was ordered to the poop, and his grapnel men were posted, and prompt to obey his command at the very moment of impact. As a result, the foundering Arabella was literally kept afloat by the half-dozen grapnels that in an instant moored her firmly to the Victorieuse. Willoughby and van der Kuylen on the poop had watched in breathless amazement the speed and precision with which Blood and his desperate crew had gone to work. And now he came racing up, his bugler sounding the charge, the main host of the buccaneers following him, whilst the vanguard, led by the gunner Ogle, who had been driven from his guns by water in the gun deck, leapt shouting to the prow of the Victorieuse, to whose level the high poop of the waterlogged Arabella had sunk. Led now by Blood himself, they launched themselves upon the French like hounds upon the stag they have brought to bay. After them went others, until all had gone, and none but Willoughby and the Dutchman were left to watch the fight from the quarter-deck of the abandoned Arabella. For fully half an hour that battle raged aboard the Frenchman. Beginning in the prow, it surged through the forecastle to the waist, where it reached a climax of fury. The French resisted stubbornly, and they had the advantage of numbers to encourage them. But for all their stubborn valor, they ended by being pressed back and back across the decks that were dangerously canted to starboard by the pull of the waterlogged Arabella. The buccaneers fought with the desperate fury of men who know that retreat is impossible, for there was no ship to which they could retreat, and here they must prevail and make the Victorieuse their own or perish. And their own they made her in the end, and at a cost of nearly half their numbers. Driven to the quarter-deck, the surviving defenders, urged on by the infuriated Rivarol, maintained a while their desperate resistance. But in the end Rivarol went down with a bullet in his head, and the French remnant, numbering scarcely a score of whole men, called for quarter. Even then the labors of Blood's men were not at an end. The Elizabeth and the Medusa were tight-locked, and Hagthorpe's followers were being driven back aboard their own ship for the second time. Prompt measures were demanded. Whilst Pitt and his seamen bore their part with the sails, and Ogle went below with a gun crew, Blood ordered the grapnels to be loosed at once. Lord Willoughby and the Admiral were already aboard the Victorieuse. As they swung off to the rescue of Hagthorpe, Blood, from the quarterdeck of the conquered vessel, looked his last upon the ship that had served him so well, the ship that had become to him almost as a part of himself. A moment she rocked after her release, then slowly and gradually settled down, the water gurgling and eddying about her topmasts, all that remained visible to mark the spot where she had met her death. As he stood there, above the ghastly shambles in the waist of the victors, someone spoke behind him. "I think, Captain Blood, that it is necessary I should beg your pardon for the second time. Never before have I seen the impossible made possible by resource and valor, or victory so gallantly snatched from defeat." He turned and presented to Lord Willoughby a formidable front. His headpiece was gone, his breastplate dinted, his right sleeve a rag hanging from his shoulder about a naked arm. He was splashed from head to foot with blood, and there was blood from a scalp wound that he had taken matting his hair and mixing with the grime of powder on his face to render him unrecognizable. But from that horrible mask 2 vivid eyes looked out preternaturally bright, and from those eyes 2 tears had plowed each a furrow through the filth of his cheeks. Chapter 31. His Excellency the Governor. When the cost of that victory came to be counted, it was found that of 320 buccaneers who had left Cartagena with Captain Blood, a bare 100 remained sound and whole. The Elizabeth had suffered so seriously that it was doubtful if she could ever again be rendered seaworthy, and Hagthorpe, who had so gallantly commanded her in that last action, was dead. Against this, on the other side of the account, stood the facts that, with a far inferior force and by sheer skill and desperate valor, Blood's buccaneers had saved Jamaica from bombardment and pillage, and they had captured the fleet of M. de Rivarol, and seized for the benefit of King William the splendid treasure which she carried. It was not until the evening of the following day that Van der Kuylen's truant fleet of 9 ships came to anchor in the harbor of Port Royal, and its officers, Dutch and English, were made acquainted with their admiral's true opinion of their worth. 6 ships of that fleet were instantly refitted for sea. There were other West Indian settlements demanding the visit of inspection of the new Governor-General, and Lord Willoughby was in haste to sail for the Antilles. "And meanwhile," he complained to his admiral, "I am detained here by the absence of this fool of a deputy governor." "So," said Van der Kuylen, "but which why should Dad deadine you? That I may break the dog as he deserves, and appoint his successor in some man gifted with a sense of where his duty lies, and with the ability to perform it. Ah, but it is not necessary you remain for dat. And he will require no instructions this one. He will know how to make Port Royal safe better nor you or me." "You mean Blood?" "Of course. Could any man be better? You have seen vad he can do." "You think so too, eh?" "Egad, I had thought of it, and rip me why not? He's a better man than Morgan, and Morgan was made governor. Blood was sent for. He came, spruce and debonair once more, having exploited the resources of Port Royal so to render himself. He was a trifle dazzled by the honor proposed to him, when Lord Willoughby made it known. It was so far beyond anything that he had dreamed, and he was assailed by doubts of his capacity to undertake so onerous a charge. "Damn," snapped Willoughby, "should I offer it unless I were satisfied of your capacity? If that's your only objection." "It is not, my lord. I had counted upon going home, so I had. I am hungry for the green lanes of England." He sighed. "There will be apple blossoms in the orchards of Somerset." "Apple blossoms." His lordship's voice shot up like a rocket and cracked on the word. "What the devil?" "Apple blossoms." He looked at Van der Kuylen. The admiral raised his brows and pursed his heavy lips. His eyes twinkled humorously in his great face. "So," he said. "Very poetical." My lord wheeled fiercely upon Captain Blood. "You've a past score to wipe out, my man," he admonished him. "You've done something towards it, I confess, and you've shown your quality in doing it. That's why I offer you the governorship of Jamaica in His Majesty's name, because I account you the fittest man for the office that I have seen." Blood bowed low. "Your lordship is very good. But, there's no but to it. If you want your past forgotten and your future assured, this is your chance. And you are not to treat it lightly on account of apple blossoms or any other damned sentimental nonsense. Your duty lies here at least for as long as the war lasts. When the war's over, you may get back to Somerset and cider or your native Ireland and its potheen, but until then you'll make the best of Jamaica and rum." Van der Kuylen exploded into laughter. But from Blood the pleasantry elicited no smile. He remained solemn to the point of glumness. His thoughts were on Miss Bishop, who was somewhere here in this very house in which they stood, but whom he had not seen since his arrival. Had she but shown him some compassion. And then the rasping voice of Willoughby cut in again, upbraiding him for his hesitation, pointing out to him his incredible stupidity in trifling with such a golden opportunity as this. He stiffened and bowed. "My lord, you are in the right. I'm a fool. But don't be accounting me an ingrate as well. If I have hesitated, it is because there are considerations with which I will not trouble your lordship." "Apple blossoms, I suppose?" sniffed his lordship. This time Blood laughed, but there was still a lingering wistfulness in his eyes. "It shall be as you wish, and very gratefully, let me assure your lordship. I shall know how to earn his majesty's approbation. You may depend upon my loyal service. If I didn't, I shouldn't offer you this governorship." Thus it was settled. Blood's commission was made out and sealed in the presence of Mallard, the commandant, and the other officers of the garrison, who looked on in round-eyed astonishment, but kept their thoughts to themselves. "Now we can aboot our business go," said van der Kuylen. "We sail tomorrow morning," his lordship announced. Blood was startled. "And Colonel Bishop?" he asked. "He becomes your affair. You are now the governor. You will deal with him as you think proper on his return. Hang him from his own yardarm. He deserves it." "Isn't the task a trifle invidious?" wondered Blood. "Very well. I'll leave a letter for him. I hope he'll like it." Captain Blood took up his duties at once. There was much to be done to place Port Royal in a proper state of defense, after what had happened there. He made an inspection of the ruined fort, and issued instructions for the work upon it, which was to be started immediately. Next he ordered the careening of the 3 French vessels that they might be rendered seaworthy once more. Finally, with the sanction of Lord Willoughby, he marshalled his buccaneers and surrendered to them 1/5 of the captured treasure, leaving it to their choice thereafter either to depart or to enroll themselves in the service of King William. A score of them elected to remain, and amongst these were Jeremy Pitt, Ogle, and Dyke, whose outlawry, like Blood's, had come to an end with the downfall of King James. They were, saving old Wolverstone, who had been left behind at Cartagena, the only survivors of that band of rebels convict who had left Barbados over 3 years ago in the Cinco Lagos. On the following morning, whilst van der Kuylen's fleet was making finally ready for sea, Blood sat in the spacious whitewashed room that was the governor's office, when Major Mallard brought him word that Bishop's homing squadron was in sight. "That is very well," said Blood. "I am glad he comes before Lord Willoughby's departure. The orders, Major, are that you place him under arrest the moment he steps ashore. Then bring him here to me." "A moment." He wrote a hurried note. "That to Lord Willoughby aboard Admiral van der Kuylen's flagship." Major Mallard saluted and departed. Peter Blood sat back in his chair and stared at the ceiling, frowning. Time moved on. Came a tap at the door, and an elderly Negro slave presented himself. Would His Excellency receive Miss Bishop? His Excellency changed color. He sat quite still, staring at the Negro a moment, conscious that his pulses were drumming in a manner wholly unusual to them. Then quietly he assented. He rose when she entered, and if he was not as pale as she was, it was because his tan dissembled it. For a moment there was silence between them as they stood looking each at the other. Then she moved forward and began at last to speak, haltingly, in an unsteady voice, amazing in one usually so calm and deliberate. Major Mallard has just told me." "Major Mallard exceeded his duty," said Blood, and because of the effort he made to steady his voice it sounded harsh and unduly loud. He saw her start and stop and instantly made amends. "You alarm yourself without reason, Miss Bishop. Whatever may lie between me and your uncle, you may be sure that I shall not follow the example he has set me. I shall not abuse my position to prosecute a private vengeance. On the contrary, I shall abuse it to protect him. Lord Willoughby's recommendation to me is that I shall treat him without mercy. My own intention is to send him back to his plantation in Barbados." She came slowly forward now. I'm glad that you will do that. Glad above all for your own sake." She held out her hand to him. He considered it critically. Then he bowed over it. "I'll not presume to take it in the hand of a thief and a pirate," said he bitterly. "You are no longer that," she said and strove to smile. "Yet I owe no thanks to you that I am not," he answered. "I think there's no more to be said, unless it be to add the assurance that Lord Julian Wade has also nothing to apprehend from me. That, no doubt, will be the assurance that your peace of mind requires. For your own sake, yes, but for your own sake only. I would not have you do anything mean or dishonoring. Thief and pirate though I be?" She clenched her hand, and made a little gesture of despair and impatience. "Will you never forgive me those words? I'm finding it a trifle hard, I confess. But what does it matter when all is said?" Her clear hazel eyes considered him a moment wistfully. Then she put out her hand again. "I am going, Captain Blood. Since you are so generous to my uncle, I shall be returning to Barbados with him. We are not like to meet again, ever. Is it impossible that we should part friends? Once I wronged you, I know. And I have said that I am sorry. Won't you say goodbye?" He seemed to rouse himself, to shake off a mantle of deliberate harshness. He took the hand she proffered. Retaining it, he spoke, his eyes somberly, wistfully considering her. "You are returning to Barbados?" he said slowly. "Will Lord Julian be going with you?" "Why do you ask me that?" she confronted him quite fearlessly. "Sure now, didn't he give you my message, or did he bungle it?" "No, he didn't bungle it. He gave it me in your own words. It touched me very deeply. It made me see clearly my error and my injustice. I owe it to you that I should say this by way of amend. I judged too harshly where it was a presumption to judge at all." He was still holding her hand. "And Lord Julian then?" he asked, his eyes watching her, bright as sapphires in that copper-colored face. "Lord Julian will no doubt be going home to England. There is nothing more for him to do out here. But didn't he ask you to go with him?" "He did. I forgive you the impertinence." A wild hope leapt to life within him. "And you? Glory be, you'll not be telling me you refused to become my lady when— Oh, you are insufferable." She tore her hand free and backed away from him. "I should not have come. Goodbye." She was speeding to the door. He sprang after her and caught her. Her face flamed and her eyes stabbed him like daggers. "These are pirates' ways, I think. Release me." "Arabella," he cried on a note of pleading. "Are ye meaning it? Must I release ye? Must I let ye go and never set eyes on ye again? Or will ye stay and make this exile endurable until we can go home together? Och, ye crying now. What have I said to make ye cry, my dear?" I thought you'd never say it," she mocked him through her tears. "Well now, ye see there was Lord Julian, a fine figure of a— There was never anybody but you, Peter." They had, of course, a deal to say thereafter, so much, indeed, that they sat down to say it, whilst time sped on, and Governor Blood forgot the duties of his office. He had reached home at last. His odyssey was ended. And meanwhile Colonel Bishop's fleet had come to anchor, and the colonel had landed on the Mole, a disgruntled man to be disgruntled further yet. He was accompanied ashore by Lord Julian Wade. A corporal's guard was drawn up to receive him, and in advance of this stood Major Mallard and two others who were unknown to the deputy governor. One slight and elegant, the other big and brawny. Major Mallard advanced. "Colonel Bishop, I have orders to arrest you." "Your sword, sir." "By order of the governor of Jamaica," said the elegant little man behind Major Mallard. Bishop swung to him. "The governor? You're mad." He looked from one to the other. "I am the governor." "You were," said the little man dryly. "But we've changed that in your absence. You're broke for abandoning your post without due cause, and thereby imperiling the settlement over which you had charge. It's a serious matter, Colonel Bishop, as you may find. Considering that you held your office from the government of King James, it is even possible that a charge of treason might lie against you. It rests with your successor entirely whether ye be hanged or not." Bishop rapped out an oath, and then, shaken by a sudden fear, "Who the devil may you be?" he asked. "I am Lord Willoughby, Governor-General of His Majesty's colonies in the West Indies. You were informed, I think, of my coming?" The remains of Bishop's anger fell from him like a cloak. He broke into a sweat of fear. Behind him Lord Julian looked on, his handsome face suddenly white and drawn. "But, my lord," began the colonel. "Sir, I am not concerned to hear your reasons," his lordship interrupted him harshly. "I am on the point of sailing and I have not the time. The governor will hear you and no doubt deal justly by you." He waved to Major Mallard, and Bishop, a crumpled, broken man, allowed himself to be led away. To Lord Julian, who went with him, since none deterred him, Bishop expressed himself when presently he had sufficiently recovered. "This is one more item to the account of that scoundrel Blood," he said through his teeth. "My God, what a reckoning there will be when we meet." Major Mallard turned away his face that he might conceal his smile, and without further words led him a prisoner to the governor's house, the house that so long had been Colonel Bishop's own residence. He was left to wait under guard in the hall, whilst Major Mallard went ahead to announce him. Miss Bishop was still with Peter Blood when Major Mallard entered. His announcement startled them back to realities. "You will be merciful with him. You will spare him all you can for my sake, Peter?" she pleaded. "To be sure I will," said Blood. "But I'm afraid the circumstances won't." She effaced herself, escaping into the garden, and Major Mallard fetched the colonel. "His Excellency the Governor will see you now," said he, and threw wide the door. Colonel Bishop staggered in and stood waiting. At the table sat a man of whom nothing was visible but the top of a carefully curled black head. Then this head was raised, and a pair of blue eyes solemnly regarded the prisoner. Colonel Bishop made a noise in his throat, and, paralyzed by amazement, stared into the face of His Excellency the Deputy Governor of Jamaica, which was the face of the man he had been hunting in Tortuga to his present undoing. The situation was best expressed to Lord Willoughby by Van der Kuylen as the pair stepped aboard the Admiral's flagship. "Id is very poetical," he said, his blue eyes twinkling. "Captain Blood is fond of Baudry, you remember de apple blossoms. So, ha ha."